During public question time and public statement time, it is assumed that your consent is given for the audio to be recorded. Please keep your comments respectful to the Council and other members of the community. Visual images of the public will not be captured. Conditions of entry. No electronic, visual or audio recording or transmitting device or instrument is permitted to be used. A person who breaches this provision of the City of Swan Meeting Procedures Local Law 2019 will be immediately required to leave the premises. And attendance's apologies, Mr CEO.
Mr Mayor, just have Councillor Predovnik, who is running late this evening, and we should expect her around about 7 p.m.
Okay, no others? Okay, declarations of financial and proximity interest and interest affecting impartiality. As per the agenda form, are there any others, councillors or staff?
Mr Mayor, I just have two additional declarations of interest. The first one is from Councillor Johnson in relation to item 4.5 for 77 James Street, and that's an interest of impartiality. This item is a DA from a fellow councillor, and also in relation to item 4.5 from Councillor Richardson, and it's a financial one. Item 4.5, and the reason is homeowner, and that's a financial one. Yeah,
it's already listed.
3.2, Guildford Heritage Area Local Planning Impartiality as Guildford Association member from Councillor Richardson.
Okay. Any others, councillors? Councillor Scanlon.
Given the nature of Councillor Johnson's interest in 4.5, Councillor Richardson is a fellow councillor to all of us. Should we all declare an impartiality? I feel I'm able to be partial, and I thought that I wouldn't need to submit one because I am acting partially. Is that correct?
Just through you, Mr Mayor, I mean, Councillor Johnson's made a decision to declare an impartiality interest, and that's Councillor Johnson's desire.
And you also got Mr Van Lind. Okay, now we move to public question time. Question and answers recorded in the minutes of the meeting may be summarised in accordance with the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996. Questions and answers marked with an asterisk have been amended either for the purpose of summarising, for example, removing preambles and statements, or editing. Answers to questions which were taken on notice. There were questions taken on notice from Mr Aaron Bowman, which are included in the agenda, and I believe, Mr Bowman, you have some questions regarding those responses. Further questions? Okay, all right. But they're not relating to the previous one? Okay, we'll get to you shortly. Questions relating to reports on the agenda. Questions were taken on notice. I have nil. Question is 5.2.2, questions for which due notice has been given. I have questions from Daniel Morath, which have been answered. And I'll have further questions on item 4.5. Councillor Richardson, you may wish to leave the room. Thank you. It pertains to item 4.9, amendments to aspects of the development approval DA 234-18B, a demolition, alterations and additions to existing dwelling, including a loft conversion of lot 29, number 77 James Street. And first up is Mr Terry Quaife.
Thanks. I have 5 questions. Why has there not been a heritage impact assessment carried on the renovations to 77 James Street, Guildford, either for the original application or the ongoing changes which have been made to this listed Category 3 building? 2. Why is the development application for an extension to number 1 Hill Street, Guildford, being scrutinised so heavily by some council members, who are also members of the Guildford Association, when the same scrutiny was not given to the house at 77 James Street? 3. Does the Swan Planning Department treat all development applications, including those from sitting councillors, to the same level of scrutiny as everybody else? 4. Local Planning Policy C106 states that one of its objectives is to provide improved certainty to landowners and the community about what is considered to be appropriate development within the precinct. Does the council feel that this objective is being met, given the current level of frustration and confusion by some applicants with respect to DAs in the Heritage Precinct? 5. Can the council provide a clear statement of the procedures to be followed with respect to councillors declaring their interests in planning applications to provide proper transparency, especially with respect to the influence of the Guildford Association when some of its members hold positions on council?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Quaife.
you.
I think we'll be taking a majority of them on notice unless there's any officers feel they can answer. No, thank you. Our next question is from Ms. Gabrielle Morgan.
Evening. My name's Gabrielle Morgan, as you all know. I live in 79 James Street, Guildford. I've lived there for 13 years. I'd like to ask if there was a Guildford Association assessment in line with the P0LC 106 local planning policy, Guildford Conversation Precinct, completed with what was the outcome prior to submission and during these amendments over the 2-year period. Last week, deputations were given in regards to the application for 77 James Street, additions regarding public consultation. Why was there no interest shown previously on all other deputations? Could I ask Council if there was or wasn't a deputation given from the adjacent neighbours to 77 James, that being 75 James Street? If so, was this from the tenant or the owner? Could I ask the Council what is the outcome of the unauthorised construction in regards to items and their non-compliance in reference to Section 2142 of the Planning and Development Act of 2005? At the Agenda Forum, it was confirmed by M.R. Russell that the Guildford Association did not make a submission to DA 234/2018 at any time during the 4 public consultation processes. This application concerns a heritage property. Can the Council establish why this instant no objection was submitted by the Guildford Association? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. We'll take all those on notice. Next is Mr. Peter Dolan. Yeah.
Just 3 questions relevant to R codes. So I'm just going to refer to the numbers, just make it easy because they're quite large. In 3.32 of the R codes volume 1, prior to the application and additional amendments, was there sufficient evidence provided in regards to section 3.32 in the R codes?
Sorry, Mr. Dolan.
Yeah. Oh, righto. I'm just going to refer to 4.11. It's quite short. I'll read it. So where a development proposal is deemed to comply in accordance with the R Codes Volume 1, it will not require advertising to adjoining owners and occupiers. So I guess was or wasn't this deemed to comply? That's my question. And if so, I'd like to see the outcome of both ways. Just referring to 4.2 on consultation procedure, A, B, C and D of 4.21, I'm referring to D being at least 14 days after the date of posting a notification or specified within the scheme towards us as public notification. I'd just like to ask the question, why are we always left with 2 to 3 days to try and come up with what we seem and deem is unfit?
Okay. Mr. Nolan, we'll take questions on notice.
That's all I have.
You got some more?
Got some more?
Have you got any more?
Yeah, the primary regional road scheme for James Street, my recent application for my fence showed a 6x6 truncation. Now, any new application, this would fall under their law. That includes fence, land lots. So my question is obviously the same again. Are they going to be falling under the same truncation law in regards to a new application?
Okay. Taking on questions on notice.
And my last question is, how many amendments can you put on a first primary application towards any sort of build? Basically what I'm getting at there is how many times can you amend something on the same application?
We'll put all your questions, we'll supply an answer, we'll take my notice. Thanks.
Thank you.
Megan, do you want those handed in or you got them? Okay, if we could just have those copies of questions handed in to our staff outside there. Okay, next I have questions from on regards to... Oh, so can someone recall Councillor Richardson, please? Graham Goddard. Who's he? Next, I have Mr Graham Goddard, who's got some questions regarding item 4.1 and 4.2, which relates to a single houses storage shed on a poultry farm in Cheltenham Street, and also a replacement of the existing shed on the same premises. Mr Goddard, are you with us? No. And I have questions from Mr Aaron Bowman on unspecified items. Thank you, Mr Bowman. Just a second, Mr Bowman. Mr Goddard? Okay, right. Carry on, Mr Bowman, you're up. And you got 5 questions.
The planned additional 10,000 dwellings and 30,000 population within the 2 North Allenbrook structure plans will significantly impact the surrounding areas, including Allenbrook, Averley and Bullsbrook. No development should be allowed until such time as the additional North Link interchange is preferably fully built, but most importantly, fully funded by anyone other than the City of Swan ratepayers. Although some councillors do not appreciate the current problems we experience every day with the amount of traffic using many of the roads to and from and within Allenbrook and Averley, as was evidenced at last month's council meeting when Councillor Richardson tried to not proceed with the duplication of Nangara Road between Henley Brook Avenue to Edgerton Drive and wanted to give back $1.6 million of grant funding, or from the lack of action by councillors and staff on the serious safety issues and the daily bingles and many near head-ons.
Mr Bowman, have you got questions here?
Yep.
Okay, can you get to them, please?
Will Council do everything that they can to ensure that stages 1A, 1B and 2 of the East Structure Plan, which will bring with it an additional 6,000 plus vehicles, is not allowed to progress, as all councillors understand and acknowledge the impact it will have on the road network in the area and the impact it will have on all residents who live in the vicinity of this development?
Okay, you get any more, or is that it?
That's my first question.
Okay. I would suggest the answer to that is yes. So, carry on.
Mr Mayor, the world has changed and no longer can local governments afford to waste money on questionable purchases, especially those that occur each and every year. Without even thinking too long, I list the following examples: Christmas decorations, the mayoral dinner, and also the community calendars. Mr Mayor, I understand that staff have advised in the report that the Community Perception Survey acknowledges that the calendar is the most well-known communication product from the City of Swan. However, this to me is not a positive fact and merely illustrates the city does not communicate well with us, the ratepayers and residents. The calendar often appears to be more about promoting councillors and perhaps sometimes 12 local businesses, which is great for those 12, but what about the rest? How are they even chosen? Mr Mayor, the 3 examples I've previously referred to cost each and every year $200,000, but could be a lot more depending on whether council chooses the deluxe options. My question is, would the $200,000 plus per year be better spent on providing much needed community and sporting infrastructure, which could then be enjoyed by all residents and ratepayers, not just once, but throughout the year on an ongoing basis?
I think that's open to everyone's perception, so carry on.
Item 7.2, I note the timely review of the election sign policy in the lead up to the next local government election. We all agree that for each and every election, whether federal, state or local, there are many signs placed throughout the city. Some candidates more than others, and some of the most prolific examples are from those sitting in this chamber tonight. Mr Mayor, it's my opinion, however, that the policy breaches the extent of what the city can do when consideration is given to the previous Supreme Court and High Court decisions, and as such I must question the why. Mr Mayor, there are still election signs from the state election on display throughout the city. Mr Mayor, there are many examples of signs placed on roundabouts, intersections and my pet hate tied to give way and stop signs, which have been there for many months. Mr Mayor, it's my understanding that it's unlawful to limit the freedom of political advertising, and more than what there's placed on other signage. And given there appears to be little done by the city with proliferation of signs scattered throughout the city on the road reserves and intersections, etc., will the city staff therefore only be targeting political signs, and dare I say only by certain candidates, or will we see the immediate removal of all these other signs immediately?
I'll take your question on notice.
Mr Mayor, you may think it's an unreasonable request or too hard, or that there is no savings to be made or fat to be trimmed from the upcoming council budget, but I've already suggested $200,000 plus in savings already tonight without even trying. Will council consider a 1% across-the-board cut to expenditure budget, whereby staff reduce all expenditure on average by 1% without reducing the level of service provided to the residents and ratepayers, and then request the staff that they bring forward much-needed expenditure on community and sporting infrastructure?
Take your questions on notice, Mr Byrne.
And my final question, Mr Mayor. At last month's council meeting, council debated for 39 minutes, it's all over Facebook, I didn't time it, whether to continue with allowing to have a glass of wine or a beer on a council meeting. It was good to see the majority of councillors openly, for the record, stated they did not agree to or do not have one before the meeting, and perhaps this may have been because that would have been political suicide to say otherwise. I hope that policies are now in place restricting drinking to only after the meeting. Mr Mayor, during the debate of this item, it was interesting that some councillors had all the relevant financial information for this item, quoting $3,500 per year for the drinks, and only $2,000 of this being alcoholic drinks, and the other amount for such things as Coke, bottled water, etc. Mr Mayor, at the same council meeting, Councillor Congleton moved an amendment to the bulk verge collection service, which was to implement a system that would allow up to 2 passes per annum for commercial properties in the city to dispose of a limited amount of material to the city's Bullsbrook and Malaga recycling centres. Mr Mayor, this should have been ruled out of order. It was not relevant to the agenda item, being a verge collection services. This would allow officers to be able to provide a separate report on the matter where councillors would have received all the relevant information before making a decision. Mr Mayor, did the councillors have the full financial implications for this amendment? What was the amount? Will commercial rates increase to cover this, or will residential ratepayers be expected to fund this? And if not, what other community or sporting projects will now not go ahead due to the increased cost? And Mr Mayor, am I to assume that not one of the 15 councillors here do not own any commercial property, because not one declared a financial interest as far as I can see, and we all know that not declaring a financial interest is a serious breach of the Local Government Act?
Thank you, Mr Damon. Okay. Questions for which notice has been given. I have questions from Ms Nikki Gill, Ms Stephanie Radis, Naomi Jenkin, Karen Mowat, Jacqueline Jones and Bob Baku that all have been answered. Now go to public statement time, and I have one registered for a public statement. Is Mr Dale Reid in regards to bridal trails in the city of Swan. Okay, yep. Okay, yep, there we are. Okay, and I've got apparently some additional questions. Samantha Button, is it? First? Oh, well, okay, well, we've got the others. So we've got Gabe, Callum and Gyrus, is it?
Gyrus.
Gyrus.
Yep. Gabe is my son, but when you are standing up here, it's quite disconcerting, and he's a little bit disconcerted. So could you tell him it's quite okay to speak in front of you all and he's not to be nervous? Because I want him to ask his question.
Knock yourself out. Knock yourself out, young fella. There's no one extraordinary sitting in front of you, so you can ask as many... Well, you can ask up to 5 questions.
Extraordinary sitting in front of you.
Hi, my name is Gabe. This is Callum and Gyrus. The reason we are here tonight is to ask the City of Swan if we could get a little bit of land to build some bike jumps in or near Vivash. My mates and I have been building some bike jumps near the river. We ride all the very good jumps built by professionals, but we really love to build our own bike jumps. We built a little trolley, and in it we put our tools and food. Building bike jumps is fun because we shape them and make them any size, and we can fix them if they are not right. The problem is that there are people that get grumpy at us and tell us off for building jumps in the bush. Please, could we have a little bit of land and some dirt for building some bike jumps?
Good job, Gabe. Wasn't that hard, was it?
No. Thank you.
Okay, and now Samantha Button, is it? Burton? Your writing is atrocious. Thank you.
Just very quickly, I saw selling homes online council agenda this month. I'm worried that I'm on the list. I don't think my ex is paying rates. My question is there nothing that can be done for victims of domestic violence wanting to pay their rates?
We'll take that on notice. Thank you. Right, now is there no more questions? Mr. Gavin Troy, we are blessed this evening.
Mr. Mayor, I'm delighted to be here. I have two questions. First of all, the first one relates to item Part B31, North Ellenbrook District Structure Plan, and I commend the planning staff on the effort they've made to date. However, I would ask the question that they continue their good work. This is a classic case of ribbon development. You've got a brand new highway that's been put in, and you're now proposing housing development right alongside it with an interchange. I mean, where are we going to finish up? Somewhere north of Mora with metropolitan development if we continue this way? There's an obvious solution to it. The feeder road should be provided by the developer and come back to the next existing interchange. And I hope your staff will pursue that avenue. Thank you for the opportunity to ask that question. Let me turn to my second question, and this is very, very up to date. Did council or members thereof receive an invitation from the state government to the opening of the railcar manufacturing facility at Bellevue on Monday the 7th of June?
I think that's a pretty firm no.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Troy. And also, I believe another question from Mr. Dave Scott. You're a client? Okay, cool. So no others? Okay, now move to public statement time. And Mr. Dale Reid in regards to bridle trails in the City of Swan. Mr. Reid there? Nope, he's not here. Okay, now we move to petitions. A member of the public tabling a petition may make a 2-minute statement to accompany petition. 7.1 there is a petition containing 25 signatures requesting the City change the configuration of Hugh Street, Guildford to allow for one-way traffic. No other petitions? No, in that case, officer's comment there. Councillor, just need a recommendation that the petitions be referred to the CEO for a report to come to future council. Moved Councillor Johnson, seconded Councillor Jones. Is anyone get that carried? There are no deputations. Announcements from the presiding member, and I have a couple. Firstly, councillors, in regards to the Swim Australia Awards, the Swan Active Swim School has taken out first place in the Swim Australia Awards, receiving the Best 2020 Swim School Innovation Award. While our pools were temporarily closed during the COVID lockdown last year, the swim staff took the plunge and tried something novel, embracing the role of social media content creators. From jumping onto the TikTok craze to producing at-home workout videos for YouTube, Swan Active was recognised for their outstanding efforts to keep customers informed, engaged and entertained in the digital space. Congratulations to Swan Active team, and I look forward to more of their TikTok videos in the future. If you haven't seen them, some were very funny. Parks and Leisure Australia Awards. The City of Swan's Beachborough Community Hub was awarded Community Facility of the Year for its innovative features of design, development and operations at the Parks and Leisure Australia Regional Awards. The awards recognise and showcase outstanding initiatives and innovative efforts which promote and enhance leisure time across 12 award-winning categories. Another city project, the first stage of New Junction's vibrant open space Weep Park in Midland, was also named as a finalist in the Park of the Year category. Our congratulations to all the staff who worked tirelessly on both of those valuable projects. Channel 7 News Young Achiever Awards. Swan Active Midland's Effie Garlett-Watson was named as a finalist in the Health and Wellbeing Award at the recent Channel 7 News Young Achiever Awards. Effie is an outstanding young man who has grown up in the Swan Active family. We're very proud to have such a dedicated and motivated role-making young man in our community. Well done, Effie. The 2021 AFL Sports Ready Trainee of the Year. Swan Active employee Jess Cox has been named the 2021 AFL Sports Ready Trainee of the Year in Perth. Jess was nominated by her colleagues as she has a can-do attitude and is down to earth and is fun and approachable. A huge congratulations to Jess for this well-deserved award, and if you give a round of applause to all those staff and recipients, thank you. I now move to members' questions that were taken on notice, and questions from Councillor Jones have been answered. 10.2 questions for which due notice has been given, and there are a number of questions from Councillor Johnson that have been answered, and 10.3 questions of which due notice has not been given from councillors. None. Leave of absence, Mr CEO.
Mr Mayor, we have a leave of application and absence for Councillor Jones from the 8th to the 22nd of July inclusive.
Okay, any other requests for leave? Okay, moved by Councillor Lucas, seconded by Councillor Parry. There's no one against, that carried. Confirmations of the minutes. Councillors, you see there a recommendation where there's some couple of changes there in regards to the voting on items C1.4, Councillor Johnson's motion on the mayoral dinner, and 4.9, additional house in Peachy Road, Janebrook. So I can have a move that those minutes be adopted with the changes. Move Councillor Parry, second to Councillor Johnson. Anyone against? Declare those carried. It now takes us to any business left over from the previous meeting. We move to item 13.3, the part demolition alterations additions to existing single house at Lot 20, Number 1, Hill Street, Guildford. And a motion from Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My motion is that Council resolve to refuse the application for proposed single house additions and alterations Lot 20, Number 1, Hill Street, Guildford, for the following reason. The proposed ensuite addition is considered to not comply with the City's local planning policy 106, Guildford Conservation Precinct, in that it is a lateral extension to the eastern side of the front facade of the existing dwelling that is considered to be unsympathetic to the existing dwelling as viewed from the street. 2, to delegate to the Chief Executive Officer authority to grant conditional approval to a revised planning application in all respects the same as this application, but for the removal of the ensuite addition to the existing dwelling, subject to such amendment being satisfactory to the Department of Planning, Lands, Heritage and Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions. 3, record the reasons for changing the officer's recommendation are 1, to secure a better design outcome whereby the additions are more sympathetic to the appearance of the existing 1860s convict-era heritage Category 3 dwelling as viewed from the street. 2, the City of Swan's Guildford Conservation Policy states at 6.1.5 that additions shall not visually intrude on the original building or the streetscape and shall be in sympathy with the original building. And 3, the proposed Guildford Heritage Area Planning Policy on page 22 of the draft policy gives design guidance, DG 8.3.1, C, new additions to contributory buildings are not visible from the primary street frontage.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kiley, is there anyone against? Wish to debate it? Okay, Councillor Johnson, you can open debate.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillors, both the existing Guildford Conservation Policy and the draft Guildford Heritage Area Planning Policy both support the idea that new additions to a heritage building should not be visible from the street. The idea is that the Guildford streetscape remains as unchanged as possible. Both policies allow you to build pretty much what you want at the rear, subject to the residential design codes. The ensuite on the left-hand side or eastern elevation is visible from the front and breaches both policies. The ensuite is approximately 4 metres back from the front of the building and is approximately 5 metres long. It's clearly visible from the primary street frontage. There's no disguising that this is not in sympathy with the original 1830s building. The ensuite is not essential to the new design or the comfort of the residents. If the ensuite is deleted, there will still be 3 toilets in the building. So, councillors, the ensuite is not supported by a council-approved conservation policy or by council's draft heritage planning policy for the area. That's why my motion proposes to reject the proposal, but also to delegate the authority to the CEO to approve a redesign without the ensuite. It's just one small change. They only get the rest of their design. So if you want to support our planning policies, both old and new, you can do so by supporting my motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kiley is the seconder.
I'll leave it at that, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McCulloch against the motion.
Thank you, councillors. Hill Street has come back to us after a deferral. City staff and councillors, at requesting the deferral, met with the applicant's architect on the 12th of Feb to discuss those potential changes to the applicant's plans, and subsequently revised plans were submitted on the 2nd of March. Councillors, I constantly hear from members of our community, and as we constantly hear in chamber, and we all believe very much so that it is important to be listening to our residents, to be hearing the needs of our community, that with this, the community members and those in relation to this planning application are working hard to adjust and change things to sit within planning frameworks, and working hard and spending time and money to get this done. We then defer items, we come back to the table for strong discussions to look at what needs to be done, and then we come back with refusals and rejections. We need to look carefully at Hill Street application and look at the fact that these revised plans were referred to both the Departments of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions and Planning, Lands and Heritage. Both agencies support the revised plans subject to conditions. We now see in item 1 of Councillor Johnson's motion, item 2, that once this ensuite is removed, we're going to delegate to the Chief Executive Officer authority to grant conditional approval. And it continues, subject to such amendment being satisfactory to the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage and the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attraction. Well, if I'm reading correctly in some of the officers' reports, these revised plans and plans have been submitted on 1 or 2 times, and those agencies have supported those revised plans. So I'm finding it hard to understand what we're doing here to secure a better design outcome when they are in support. We know that this place was included in the city's municipal heritage inventory, and the category of 3 being some moderate significance to the locality. And that's important, and we need to keep in mind a lot of the guidelines that protect the unique and historical nature of Guildford. We also know that going back to the drawing board, securing a better design outcome, that this applicant has intended to, and part of the proposal is to reveal the original 1860s dwelling and the flat-roofed Tuscan column front entrance porch, including interior and exterior structural and cosmetic repairs and conservation works. All very important to retaining this integral historical house. The existing roof structure will be altered to incorporate additional bedrooms. There are some additions to the carports and things like that as well. But those revised plans have been submitted, and with the historical integrity, the chimney flues are extended to retain proportions and the chimney caps reconstructed on top of them. It's keeping the historical integrity. The additions remain bagged brickwork to distinguish them from original and early construction.
You have 1 minute, Councillor.
Councillors, we've got in front of us a revised plan. It's taken time and effort and money to get through this. We've had councillors sit with planning staff and the applicant to actually work through this to get to a better or more desired outcome. And we sit here again with another application to refuse based on things that are not necessarily reasonable within the scope of approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCulloch. Speaker for the motion? Okay, well, let's hear it.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My amendment to the motion is add a condition to include that the retaining walls to be constructed with red brick.
Is that okay with the mover?
That's okay by me.
Okay. Is anyone against that being there? It's just retaining wall. If there isn't anyone, we'll conclude that part of the motion. Now, ask again, is there any speaker for the motion? Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to quickly add a few points to this debate, and that's around the heritage of Guildford. And Guildford has been recognised with the State Heritage Listing. And
Councillor, can I just stop you there? Actually,
yes?
got to speak to the application before us, not a history lesson. So if
oh,
you
sorry, I was
could address
responding
that.
to the debate that Councillor McCulloch raised.
Well, you need to get back to some points about the motion if you could, so carry on.
I'd only said a few words, but I'll keep
I
to the
knew where
motion
you were
from
going,
now
so
on.
if you could, you're wasting your time, the clock's still ticking.
Okay, my point was that this is referred to the state planning level, and that's very general. It's statewide. It encompasses all of Western Australia. We're talking Fremantle, which uses limestone in a lot of the brickwork and sandstone. We're talking York, Northam, Albany. The entire heritage of Western Australia is so broad that the State Planning Office must have all those categories listed. Now, we are the City of Swan, and our job as a local government is to protect our area, and Guildford is specific. So the Guildford Conservation Precinct, and I'll read from a City of Swan policy document, is widely regarded as a town with a high level of cultural significance. At a national level, Guildford has been designated by National Trust as an historic town and included in the Register of National Estate. At a local level, Guildford is included in the City of Swan's town planning scheme as a conservation precinct, and the City has adopted a conservation policy, the Guildford Conservation Policy, for the place. It is important to retain the cultural values of the town as it develops. The local planning policy replaces an old developmental guide and is intended to provide detailed guidance to property owners and the city to achieve good development outcomes in an important heritage context. Councillor Johnson's motion is just in line with the Guildford Conservation Policy, our policy. Yes, councillors met with the architect. Councillors went to site visits. I went on a site visit to this building, and I did see the portion of the building where the ensuite would go, and it would change the frontage, the streetscape. Where this building fronts the street, it would change it. And according to the policy, it must not change the view of the streetscape. This building is on our municipal heritage inventory. Very few buildings in Guildford actually are. And that makes us realise the significance of this building, which used to be owned by Edith Cowan's sister. It has great heritage and cultural significance. It's an absolutely beautiful building, and we welcome the development, we welcome the restoration of this important building to Guildford, and we just want the streetscape to remain as it is. The original bones of the building are beautiful, and all we want is for that to remain the same and for the two-storey development to go behind it. In speaking to the architect, he's not spoken to the actual owner about this. The architect is able to make this decision. I've been of that understanding, and I would urge all councillors to please support our policy, the Guildford Conservation Policy, and allow this building to be protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scanlon. Any speakers against the motion? Any other speakers for? Councillor Congdon, you should speak against the motion. Yep.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If I could just ask you to move to page 16 of the block paragraph, at the top of page 16, and I think it's the second and third dot points, or the last dot point. The assessment against the city's design guidelines revealed the development purpose of some variations to the acceptable development provisions of the principal design elements, scale or size or form and siting. However, the staff consider these variations satisfy the relevant performance criteria and result in a design sympathetic to the original built form and the character of the area. City staff consider the partial demolition, alterations and additions of the single house respond to the site constraints appropriately, are sympathetic to the original dwelling and do not prejudice the heritage fabric of the Guildford Conservation Precinct. And given those comments there, Mr Mayor, I intend to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Any speakers for the motion? or against? Councillor Johnson, you close the debate, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, as Councillor Scanlon pointed out, we do welcome owners updating their older buildings because if older buildings were not purchased by new owners and updated, they gradually fall into decay. Councillors, it's in Guildford. It's a very tiny part of the city of Swan, but it takes up an enormous amount of time in this council chamber. I'm often surprised by how much time councillors who don't live in Guildford spend discussing en-suites. Councillors, what we're doing here is applying our own city policy. So I've got the copy of it here, and it says here, top right-hand side, City of Swan. It's a City of Swan policy. So it's the conservation policy for Guildford. And at 6.1.5, just here, it says, additions shall not visually intrude on the original building or the street context. And if you had been to look at it, you'd see this was a particularly fine building with a particularly fine view at the front and the side. This ensuite is a 21st century addition, which is such is simply not needed, and it's not supported by our policies. So if councillors want to vote against our policies, our city policies endorsed by this council, well, you need to think carefully about whether you're actually supporting planning in the City of Swan. Councillors, this is our conservation policy, and it applies in just one small part. Now, councillors, if we delete this ensuite and delegate to the CEO the authority to approve, it's almost certain to be approved by the Heritage Council, because they will say, oh, that's great, now it looks even better. So, councillors, I suggest you support this motion. It's entirely reasonable and in line with our City of Swan planning policies, both old and new. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now put the vote. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against are the rest. Motion is lost. I now need a move of the officer's recommendation. Move Councillor McCulloch. Seconder. Councillor Kiley. Well, you seconding it first, eh? No. Well, I'm asking for a seconder first off. Councillor Congerton. Okay, is there anyone against?
I'm amending it, Mayor.
Against, and you want to move an amendment?
Yeah, it's just to include the same one as before, that all retaining walls be constructed of red brick.
That was already... Move with the seconder. Retaining walls in red brick. Is that okay with you? Okay, it's now part of the motion. Okay. Right. Councillor Johnson, you're against. Do you want to debate it all over again?
No, I think it'd be good, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I would. Please explain why you think an ensuite is a good idea.
Well, you're not asking questions, it's a debate. Councillor McCulloch, if you wish to debate it.
I think we've debated it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Seconder? Same. That leaves you.
It's interesting, Mr. Mayor, that we've not had any explanation as to why they think a fourth ensuite is needed in a building that's already got 3 toilets.
That's a question. Okay, I'll now put it in favour. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. Yep. Yeah, Councillor Richardson's out of the room. Councillor Podolsky's not here, remember? Yeah. Okay, declare that carried. Okay, we now move to item 13.4 as a petition on the slip lane at Shopping Centre at Kiara, and Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, my motion is to extend the left turn slip lane for vehicles turning left off Morley.
Oh, you're leaving the room? Thanks, Councillor.
My motion 1 is to extend the left turn slip lane for vehicles turning left off Morley Drive East into the Kiara Shopping Centre as requested by the petition, subject to a contribution from the businesses in the Kiara Shopping Centre of $5,000. 2, not undertake any modifications to enable a right turn into and out of the Kiara Shopping Centre as requested in the petition. 3, add $70,000 to the 22-23 draft capital budget for this work, noting that this amount may vary as part of the budget process as no planning or investigation has been undertaken. 4, notify the petition organiser accordingly. And 5, record the reason for changing the officer recommendation is the shopping centre will be more easily accessed from Morley Drive, and the shopping centre will be safer to access as the likelihood of vehicle accidents will be greatly reduced.
Okay, seconder, Councillor Congerton. Is there anyone against? Declare it carried. We now move to councillors to Part B of the agenda, and Councillor McNamara can come back. I've got no motion, Charlie, of any kind. No, I've got no motion.
Still need to move in second.
Hey? For what?
Or include it on block.
Yeah. Include on block. Okay, councillors, I have the following items that are to be considered on block, which is 13.9, 3.1, 3.3, 3.5, 4.3, 4.4, 4.9, 4.10, 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, 6.5, 7.2. A mover, please. Move to Councillor Lucas, second out of Kylie. Councillor Kylie, declare those carried. Now,
So have you moved 13.9 on block?
yeah.
Because councillors and then can't be in the room with that being moved on block. It's got an interest.
Okay, we'll go back to that one. You need to leave the room, Charlie Anderson? Okay, we'll go back to 13.9.
Yep.
Sorry about that, councillors. I wouldn't go far.
No.
Okay, now, councillors, this is mover for the officer's recommendation on 13.9. Moved Councillor Congerton, seconded Councillor Perry. Is there anyone against? We'll declare it carried. We'll call Councillor Zanino. Now move to item 3.2, a request for approval for public advertising Guildford Heritage Area Local Planning Scheme, a policy, and Councillor Johnson. 3.2.
Okay. Yeah, Mr Mayor, actually I was going to ask if it pleases you, could Councillor Carley's motion go first?
You're already up, Councillor, so move your motion.
I'm happy to move mine, Mayor.
Well, I just ruled that Councillor Johnson's going first, so he can
Well, I
resume
don't think
his
it's
seat.
something a Mayor could rule on, just as it's a
Well,
request.
agenda in order.
Well,
So-
he could withdraw his motion,
Well, he could withdraw his motion
but
if he
it's
wishes.
a simple request, Mayor. He could just simply ask that I go ahead of him. It's been done many a time
Well,
before
all right,
in the
move
chamber.
your motion, Councillor, get on with it.
Thank you, Councillor. So my motion is that the Council resolve to 1, defer a decision on advertising to the broader public for a period of 3 months to allow time for the City officers to 1, engage with key identified stakeholder groups regarding their views on the draft policy, its operation and its suggested local planning scheme number 17 modifications. 2, determine if the policy can be put out in a shortened or more concise format before putting out to consultation. And 3, clearly identify the changes between the old and the new policy before putting out to consultation to allow the community to make a clear comparison.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Johnson's first up. Anyone against? There is. We should debate it. Okay, in that case, I'll put it straight to vote. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Declare it carried. Now move to 3.4, which is adoption of the Altone Local Area Plan. Councillor Kiley.
Councillors, my motion is to defer consideration of this item until a future ordinary meeting of Council to allow officers time to review, to correct minor errors and to improve the document's overall readability.
Seconder? Councillor Lucas. Is anyone against? Carried. Now move to item 4.1, which is the second house, a storage shed addition associated with existing poultry farm at lot 505, number 60, Cheltenham Street, Bennett Strings. Councillor Colley.
Mayor, I just might ask staff to identify the changes overall. I don't feel as if it's necessary to read the whole document. Could I defer to staff to suggest what would be the relevant change?
Councillor Colley, this is your motion. I thought you would have approved it before it went in the agenda.
It's been a busy month, Mayor, so I'm not following exactly. Unless I go back and compare.
Well, you've had no busier month than anyone else.
I'll read the whole lot out if you like, but I thought you'd be very keen on getting the meeting finished tonight.
I would do, but I thought you might have been aware of what changes you'd made.
Councillors, my motion 1, is to advise the Western Australian Planning Commission that the City of Swan is supportive of the proposed single house on Lot 505, number 60 Cheltenham Street, Bennett Springs, subject to the imposition of the following conditions. 1. The approved development must comply in all respects with the attached approved plans as dated, marked and stamped, together with any requirements and annotations detailed thereon by the Western Australian Planning Commission. The plans approved as part of this application form part of the development approval issued. 2. That all building work shall be carried out under this development approval are required to be contained within the boundaries of the subject lot. 3. Prior to a building permit being issued, the single house must incorporate all relevant construction standards of Australian Standard 3959/2009, construction of buildings and in bushfire-prone areas as amended, applicable to the assessed bushfire attack level rate. Number 4, prior to a building permit being issued, an asset protection zone of sufficient size to ensure the potential radiant heat impact of a bushfire does not exceed 29 kilowatts per metre squared, BAL 29, in all circumstances must be established on the land surrounding the single house in accordance with the submitted bushfire management plan prepared by Alerting and Associates, dated 22nd of January 21, version 1, and element number 2 of the guidelines for planning in bushfire-prone areas. The asset protection zone must thereafter be maintained on the land in accordance with the bushfire management plan and the guidelines for planning in bushfire-prone areas to the satisfaction of the Western Australian Planning Commission for the life of the development. 5. Prior to the occupation of the single house, the requirements of the submitted bushfire management plan prepared by Alerting and Associates dated 22nd of January 21, version 1, must be implemented on the site and the land maintained to this standard in perpetuity to the satisfaction of the Western Australian Planning Commission. Number 6, prior to the commencement of works for the single house, the subject of this application, a notification pursuant to Section 70A of the Transfer of Land Act 1893 must be placed on the certificates of title of Lot 505, number 60 Cheltenham Street, Bennett Springs, advising current and future landowners that the property is subject to a bushfire management plan. Number 7, all crossovers must be built and maintained in accordance with the specifications of the City of Swan. Number 8, all stormwater must be contained and disposed of on-site at all times to the satisfaction of the Western Australian Planning Commission on advice of the City of Swan. And 2, advise the Western Australian Planning Commission that the City of Swan is not supportive of the proposed storage shed on Lot 505, number 60 Cheltenham Street, Bennett Springs, for the following reason. 1. The proposed storage shed is an intensification of the existing egg farm on site, the effect of which will be to retard the capacity for the development of the surrounding locality for urban purposes as acknowledged by both the urban deferred zone of land under the Metropolitan Region Scheme and the objectives of Improvement Plan number 55. 3. Further advise the Western Australian Planning Commission that whether it approves the application for the storage shed or not, the state government should be taking measures to secure from the proprietor the cessation of the egg farm in order to realise the urban development of the Bennett Springs locality. And 4. Record the reason for changing the officer's recommendation is that any development, including the house on site, is being done on the premise that the egg production will be done in perpetuity. This cannot be supported given urban deferred zoning of the land under the Metropolitan Region Scheme and the objectives of Improvement Plan number 55.
Okay, so what you've actually done is you removed conditions from the officer's report 10 through 16 and added a new 2 for the shed. Okay, do I have a seconder? Councillor Catalano. Is there anyone against? Councillor Congren, do you wish to debate it? Councillor Kiley, you can open the debate.
Yes, I will, thank you.
Councillors, I think I'll just refer you to points 3 and 4, that this is ultimately what it is about. It's not going to be a decision of this council as to what is going to happen on site. This will be a recommendation to the WAPC, and regardless of what recommendation we make, this is not something we would have to go to SAT to defend. It would be a decision of the WAPC alone. And I will just read point 3 and 4 again. Further advise the Western Australian Planning Commission that whether it approves the application for the storage shed or not, The state government should be taking measures to secure from the proprietor the cessation of the egg farm in order to realise the urban development of the Bennett Springs locality. On that point, councillors, we have a number of residents, landowners. We've got this is urban deferred. Ultimately, this land will be developed, I think, at this crucial time where the applicant is looking to invest money into the subject site, and we've also got the state government looking to invest money into the subject area through the rail corridor. This is the time when we should really be looking at or encouraging the WAPC to resolve this issue. This is what it's simply about. And I'll go to read point 4. Record the reason for changing the officer recommendation is that any development, including a house on the site, is being done in the premise that the egg production will be done in perpetuity. This cannot be supported given urban deferred zoning of the land under the Metropolitan Region Scheme and the objectives of Improvement Plan number 55. Councillors, this is not a decision that we have to make. It's for the WAPC to make this, but I think it's important that we recognise that this will be further investment by the applicant and further investment by the WAPC. This is the time to resolve the issue, and this is what I'm encouraging you to vote in favour of, so that we can further urbanise this area and get more ratepayers, more people moving into the area. Ultimately, this will happen either, if it doesn't happen in the next 10 years, it'll happen in 50 years, it'll happen in 80 years. This is the sort of development we want through the urban corridor. All the infrastructure's there, and we're putting a railway line straight through that area. This is where we want to have the development, so this is exactly what the rail line's for. So we really need to realise the investment of the railway line by urbanising this area. Thank you.
Councillor Catalano is the seconder.
Thank you. I don't want to add too much more to it, other than that there is a tension in this area, as Councillor Kiley has pointed out, between the current status quo and the future of that Eastern Bennett Springs area. And that does put us in a kind of a sort of difficult position, because we've now got this development application. But is this development application really appropriate? I mean, we've got the house is maybe it's appropriate to look at the house as separate to the whole chicken farm, because that's not going to impact so much on the development potential around that particular chicken farm. But ultimately, what we're really looking at is it's fairly ad hoc kind of decision making. So I think what we're trying to achieve here tonight is we're trying to say, okay, we'll look at approving the house, but ultimately the chicken farm has got to go. We know it's got to go, and the other incidental kind of aspects to it, which will come up in the next item, we can't consider approving. So what it is basically trying to reach that compromise position where we've got a decision that we make tonight that gives the green light for something that's quite a minor thing. I mean, it's a house, but ultimately it's not going to impact upon the development of the area all around it. And it's ad hoc, but it's not going to create such a major tension. It's not going to contribute to that tension that I was talking about between the chicken farm staying and impeding the development around it. When we know that this area in the future is going to change, it has to change. There's a railway line going through it. We're talking about this urban deferred, but it's in fact more than likely going to be fairly high density urban through there. And we know that the chicken farm's ultimately going to go. I mean, these are the realities of it. And we've got to think long term, not just ad hoc here in the present. And that's why I'm supporting this motion tonight.
Councillor Congdon against the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Some of the comments are made Had to do the cliche of the chicken before the egg, that story. This farm has been there for a long time, and where it currently is placed is general rural, and it can lawfully operate under general rural. The suggestion now of moving from items 10 through to 16, which says you can no longer have the storage shed, which is not going to be used for housing poultry. It is a storage shed with all the conditions attached to ensuring it's got some camouflage put around it. Saying it's an ad hoc development, I can't agree. It's an ad hoc development. The development was already there. What has happened is a rail line's running through a whole bunch of properties, and this happens to be one of them. And I think we're all pretty much well aware what's going to happen to the rail line and its TODs that might be associated with it, and or any other urban development down the track. And Councillor Cole, you're quite right, it could be 50 to 80 years. So I don't know why we're trying to put an impost on this particular owner of the property that he should make decisions now when it could be 50 to 80 years down the track. It might even be 30 years, it could be 20 years. But I can't sit here and say that we need to instruct the Australian Planning Commission to remove him from the premises. If Mr Cocking, there's a question...
Point of order, Mayor. No one's instructing the applicant from that site or asking him to remove himself from the site. This is a recommendation to the WAPC. It's not a recommendation to the applicant.
Well, I seem to recall at the agenda forum meeting a question...
You did use it during debate. Carry on,
Yes.
Councillor
So anyway, let's move on from that. I'm suggesting that if Mr Cocking wants to move his business, then somebody make him an offer that's too good to refuse. And my understanding from Mr Cocking is that no one's made him an offer too good to refuse. And whether the state government intend to, at some stage, offer Mr Cocking an offer too good to refuse to go from where it currently is in its zoning to urban, so it goes from urban deferred to urban, then let it be. But at this stage he hasn't received such, and I don't think we should be in a position to put in this impost on him. So I can't support your motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Other councillors for the motion? Speaker against? No other speakers. Councillor Cole, I'll ask you to close.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for debating, Councillor Congdon. It's raised a few, it's aired the situation and raised a few good points, but this is not an impost on the applicant. This is a request to if this motion is approved, it's a request for the WAPC to sort it out, because it's an issue that's going to drag on for many, many years beyond this meeting, whether it goes on for the next 10 years or the next 50. But if we as a state are going to invest money in a railway line through that area, then I think it's very important that we support the state in that investment by ensuring that that urban gets changed from general rural to urban deferred through to ultimately urban. So I encourage you, councillors, to make this request by supporting this motion, and make the request to the WAPC to say this is the time when it should be sorted out, when potentially we have our state coffers full. Not suggesting that Mr Cocking would end up with billions of dollars in the state coffers, but I'm sure this is a time when the state can sort this issue out, and I think it's for the greater good of the City of Swan. Thank you.
Okay. Now put the motion. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Motion's carried. Now move to item 4.2, which is the replacement of the existing poultry shed. Again, Councillor Coley.
Thank you, Mayor. My motion is that Council resolve to 1, advise the Western Australian Planning Commission that the City of Swan is not supportive of the proposed replacement poultry shed to the existing egg farm on lot 505, number 60 Cheltenham Street, Bennett Springs, for the following reasons. 1, the proposed replacement poultry shed is an intensification of the existing egg farm on site. the effect of which will be to retard the capacity for the development of the surrounding locality for urban purposes as acknowledged by both the urban deferred zoning of land under the Metropolitan Region Scheme and the objectives of the Improvement Plan number 55. 2. Further advise the Western Australian Planning Commission that whether it approves the application for the storage shed or not, the state government should be taking measures to secure from the proprietor the cessation of the egg farm in order to realise the urban development of the Bennett Springs locality. And 2. Record the reasons for changing the officer recommendation is that any development, including the house, on site is being done on the premise that the egg production will be done in perpetuity. This cannot be supported given the urban deferred zoning of land under the Metropolitan Region Scheme and the objectives of the Improvement Plan number 55.
Seconder. Councillor Catalano. Is anyone against? There is. Wish to debate all over again. Councillor Kiley, off you go.
I'm happy to put it to the vote, Mayor.
Okay. Well, in that case, you're moving the motion be put. You need 11.
I'll change my wording slightly. I'll move that the motion be put.
Okay. I will move that the motion be put. Councillors, those in favour of putting the motion? Yep, I think I've got 11. I now put the motion. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Motion's carried. Now we'll move to item 4.5. Councillor Richardson's leaving the chamber, which is amendment to amend aspects of development of approval, demolition, alterations of existing dwelling, including a loft conversion at lot number 29, number 77 James Street, Guildford. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That Council resolved to defer this item to a future ordinary meeting of Council to 1. Allow interested councillors to meet with affected residents and landowners to resolve some of the issues raised, and 2. To provide the Guildford Association, the Guildford Historical Society, a further opportunity to respond to the item. 2. Record the reasons for changing the officer's recommendation as 1. This deferral allows the local community to be further consulted, as this was raised in the agenda meeting, and that some affected landowners had 3 days at the time of the agenda to respond. 2. To allow the Guildford Association, the Guildford Historical Society to confirm in writing what the applicant raised in their response, and to provide a further opportunity to both associations, as the City of Swan had not received correspondence from either association of the 2018 application or the 2021 application.
Okay, can I have a seconder? Councillor Congdon. Is there anyone against? There is. You wish to debate it? Yep. Carry on, Councillor Parry.
I'd just like to raise a few things from last council meeting, councillors. The Kaleidoscope Initiative proposed funding options. Defer consideration of this matter to the June ordinary council meeting to allow time for a briefing to council to occur. 2. Modification to condition number 6 of an approved DA 55/2019 transport depot. Defer consideration of this matter to the ordinary future council.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. We seem to be getting a bit off.
Yeah, I'm just trying to work
I'll
out
get
where
there in
you're
a second.
getting to.
I'll just get there. So there's another 3 other issues. Just let me get there. Councillors, we all put in deferrals within our time of council and often supported unanimously in council. As noted in the Great Northern Highway item, the winery and the Peachy Road in Jane Brook.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. We are getting really off track here. We just need to
you
go
told
on
me you were
with
going
the
to get
motion.
to the point.
Well, I will, because I'm going to say the next line.
You're raising a large number of deferrals,
well,
that's what you're saying.
Hold on. So the community consultation was raised as the issue, like I have done in point 1 of this motion. In regards to point 2, and allowing, in regards to having further time for the Guildford Association, the Guildford Historical Society, further time to provide us a response. The only reason why I brought this up is because the applicant raised that those 2 associations stated that they are doing, and I quote, an amazing job, which I raised in the last week in the agenda forum. Councillors, I would not raise this as a point of deferral if the applicant did not raise it first. I simply asked Mr Russell if we received any correspondence from either the association. He said the City did not. All I'm asking is for verification of this information that has been provided by the applicant in written deputation by the very party that it was designed to state it. This is called due diligence. Very simply, councillors, my deferrals allow further consultation to the community and for the Guildford Association, the Guildford Historical Society, to confirm what the applicant has put in this document. If they choose not to, then that's their right. That's all I'm asking for you today. Thank you.
Councillor Congdon, as a seconder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I support the deferral, and in particular that I received correspondence from Mr Richardson in relation to 8 or 9 different properties that have balconies with similar setback and designs. I don't think this is going to cause the council any concern with the deferral in terms of timeframes. What's built is what's built. So I can't see if it's another 3 weeks or whatever the time frame is to come back to this, so we can have an opportunity to have a look at the referencing made by Mr Richardson. Thank you.
Councillor Kiley, Speaker against.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, I can't support this motion. I understand where it's going, but firstly, I just want to deal with a few issues there. It's to provide the Guildford Association and the Guildford Historical Society a further opportunity to respond. I can't speak solely as an individual for the Guildford Association, but it's not normal that they comment on every development, and neither does the Historical Society comment generally about developments within Guildford. So there's a point there that, as you said, it's an opportunity, but given that they haven't commented to this date, I doubt whether they possibly will. I have an alternative motion, which is to refuse the application or 2 key aspects of it, and I would like that to go through. I'd like you to look at the alternative motion on the next page, points 2 and 3, where the balcony and balustrading and also the 28-metre fence is not supported because it is clearly not in accordance with the Guildford Conservation Policy and not within the character of the area to have those developments. But so there is an alternative motion apart from this, and that is to refuse controversial elements of that development, and I would encourage you to vote against the deferral and go to my alternative motion, which is to refuse key elements of that application and then move forward from there. Thank you.
Speaker for the motion. Speaker against, Councillor Johnson.
Mr Mayor, don't I get, as the seconder, don't I get to speak?
Well, that's funny because Councillor Conklin was the seconder. You were the second hand up against the motion.
Just a bit confused by which one we're on now. Now I realise we're on Councillor Parry's motion. I'd like to speak.
Well, I just invited you to.
Mr Mayor. So, councillors, the reason I'm opposing this deferral is because it's not needed. We've got a very good motion further down the order paper from Councillor Kiley, and that motion simply recommends approval of the carport, the gazebo, changes the fence in some respects, but rejects the balcony. Mr Mayor, the balcony is clearly not in line with the Guildford Conservation Policy as you have it here. So I would suggest that rather than deferring it, we make a decision. Thanks.
Okay. Further speaker for the motion, Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of points. This evening we received a public discussion on this particular item. 5 questions were given and they were taken on notice. I'd like to know what the answers to those questions are going to be as part and parcel of a deferral. And as Councillor Conklin has mentioned, the 9 locations as given today by Mr Richardson, whilst late in the day I didn't have time to run around and look at 9 locations along with my busy schedule, so I'd like to take the time to be able to look at those. The deferral will give us an opportunity to have a closer look, and it may be when we get to our meeting in July that we end up back to where Councillor Kiley might be, but in the meantime I think we need to cover these points. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Lucas, you got a question?
Thank you to the mover of the motion. Sorry, Councillor Parris, you say to a future ordinary council meeting, you think of July or August or some other time?
I don't mind July if you want to put a date on it, or August. I don't mind at all.
I'm
it doesn't concern me.
Motion. I'd rather. Thank you. I'll speak for the motion, Mr Mayor, when you're ready.
Okay, I need a speaker against the motion. Okay. You wish to speak for the motion, against the motion? Thank you, Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you. It's actually, I would like to spend my time speaking to read the Guildford Association response to this application. So, received this afternoon from the Guildford Association is, Councillors and Mayor, thank you for the opportunity to comment on the amended DA for 77 James Street, Guildford. Unfortunately, as a not-for-profit organisation staffed by volunteers, we sometimes run into instances where there are multiple competing activities and responses vying for priority, and unfortunately we're unable to submit a statement on 77 James Street in time to be included in this week's ordinary meeting agenda. However, the GA would like to submit a position on the amendments outlined in DA 234 2018, Lot 29 James Street, Guildford. It is the GA's view that while the amendments in the DA appear to meet all appropriate guidelines, that the placing of a veranda balcony extending from an attic is atypical of the style of Guildford. As far as the GA can ascertain, the placing of a veranda balcony on the rear of a turn-of-a-century two-storey building is only found traditionally abutting the river floodplain. Examples are observed on Market Street, Helena Street and James Street. As stated, in terms of comparisons, all rear verandas, balconies are on two-storey buildings and not single-storey cottages. Also, as these properties overlook the floodplain and not other homes. The GA could not find any traditional examples of a balcony in the town centre, not even on hotels in the town of Guildford. Yours sincerely, Chris Kokoza, on behalf of Barbara Dundas, the President of the Guildford Association.
Councillor Lucas, you wish to speak for the motion?
Thank you. I have no objection to deferring it, particularly in light of the questions asked tonight in public question time by several members who obviously, several residents who live nearby or in Guildford. And there's nothing to prevent Councillor Kiley moving his alternative motion in a month or two when the item comes back. So I'd like to get the answers to those questions asked, as Councillor Henderson has outlined, and we can hear from other parties in the meantime, and perhaps the Guildford Association may have the time now, if it's extended, to make a more comprehensive submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers for or against? In that case, Councillor McCulloch, you wish to speak for the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor, thank you. Councillors, this deferral gives us an opportunity, as we so often encourage one another to consider, listening to the needs of our community, making sure that we're listening to our community and really advocating for our community's needs. And that comes into every application that we look at when we have items recommending approval or refusal, and we have members of the community that have differing opinions for some very valid reasons. So that's probably the first and foremost thing to consider. We need time to listen to those residents and other community members that live in the area. That's important. They're members of Guildford. They live in houses of heritage value and other value within the precincts. We've had questions posed, and we would expect answers to those questions that will help us form a considered decision. Councillors, at approximately 4:41 p.m. this afternoon, we had a response from the Guildford Association. I myself have been very appreciative of responses from the Guildford Association over the many years that I've been on council now. They've provided responses to many things that we need to consider and to chew over and look at very carefully. I've checked and confirmed that from the 2018 application, there have been no responses from the Guildford Association. That's a number of years, and we get one an hour and 20 minutes prior to tonight's meeting. So I'd like to maybe have a little bit more of a discussion with the Guildford Association and use that as a learning curve for myself as well, to actually unpack where we're going with this and the reasons for the deferral. I also note that over probably the last 2 years, we've had about 27 applications for Guildford. And from some of my counts, there's been at least 23 responses from the Guildford Association and some, considered time taken to unpack them. So I'm looking forward to a more detailed response in regards to those items that Councillor Scanlon raised as the atypical portions of the build. We've had residents raise issues or concerns about aspects of this new application. The gazebo, the garage, the fence and aspects of the house. Some of the questions posed are in relation to those. There are other questions from the agenda forum last week that I'd like, or things raised by some of those residents that I'd like to unpack with staff and others. Going through some of those aspects of this design and looking back to the 2018 application, speaking to some people in regards to that and from my experience as an interior designer and work in the building industry, there are a few aspects of the 2018 application that leave me a little sad. The already completed red brick additions, and I'd just like you to listen to these so we can understand that the deferral is important to make sure we've got this right. The already completed red brick additions on Hubert Street are problematic in some ways, my view.
Point of order, Mr
because
Mayor. We're talking about this development application, not the previous one.
I'm just leading into...
I think Councillor McCulloch's talking about the whole development. Karen, Councillor.
Point of order, Mr Mayor, that's the point. We're talking about this development application, which is
yes, it's
before
all
us now,
connected,
not the
Councillor
previous one.
I think we'll just see
Thank
where
you.
Councillor McCulloch's going with
They
it.
introduced
Thanks, Councillor.
a new and large element which does tend to compete or even outdoes the more modest original house, hence the considerations with the balcony as part of the build. Because we're looking at aspects of the old development and the new development or the new application,
30 seconds left, Councillor.
they were done in similar styles and material with sympathetic detail, they could present as original. So just a couple of things I will leave you with just there is that the heritage position regarding modest housing is that the best and most relevant examples are whole intact streetscapes and they can be applied universally. If we lose one house either by demolition or poor renovation, the whole streetscape suffers. And sometimes that can be the issue. So let's value our treasures. Guildford is a treasure and we need to consider.
Thank you, Councillor. Speaker for the motion? Any other speakers for and against?
Someone in the audience is trying to say something. I'm not quite sure what it is.
Well, I'm sorry, but we've finished with people in the gallery. You know that, Councillor. It's back to councillors now. So have any speakers for or against? There aren't any. Councillor Parry, I'll ask you to close.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the extra month or two would give us further assistance in regards to reviewing Councillor Kiley's motion. Also,
Councillor McCulloch, excuse me, I'm sorry. Point of order, and I ask other councillors to please be respectful of others. Thank you.
I don't know what you're carrying on about.
Me?
I just looked across to Councillor Scanlon, I'm sorry.
Okay, Councillor Parry, carry on.
Okay, thank you. Gives us more time to review Councillor Kiley's motion. Also gives us to review also the late notice of the Guildford Association. I think the deferral was worthwhile, and I ask you to put it to a vote, Mr Mayor.
Okay, put the vote. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Declare it carried. Now move councillors to... call Councillor Richardson back in. Depends. Oh, well, we might be able to. If we get to as long as we get to 6.6, the rest can be transferred to July, so none of them are urgent. We'll see how we go for time. Councillors now move to item 4.6, to propose an amendment to number 201 to local planning scheme number 17 to amend provisions pertaining to additional use of number 55 by adding garden centre to further additional use of lot number 194, number 24 Stirling Street in Guildford. Councillor Colley.
Councillors, are we missing Councillor Parry?
I think he's just gone to the toilet, isn't he?
Okay. Councillors, my motion is to 1. Prepare proposed amendment number 201 to local planning scheme number 17 to insert into Schedule 2 additional uses for additional use number 55, the use of garden centre as a further use in the additional use column with attached conditions as follows. I'm not sure how to exactly read that, but you'll see in the conditions that have been added beyond what the staff recommendation was, that conditions: number 1, only dry fertiliser product is permitted to be sold from the garden centre. Number 2, no garden centre shall be permitted to utilise the street verge for parking and service deliveries. Number 3, retail sales associated with a garden centre shall occur wholly within the property boundary. Point 2, specify that proposed amendment number 201 is, in the opinion of the Council, a standard amendment pursuant to Regulation 34 of Part 5 of the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes Regulations 2015 for the following reasons. 1, it is an amendment relating to a zone that is consistent with the objectives of the Local Planning Scheme number 17 for that zone. 2, it is an amendment that is consistent with the City of Swan local planning strategy endorsed by the Western Australian Planning Commission in August of 2020. And 3, it is an amendment that would have minimal impact on land in the scheme area that is not the subject of this amendment. And 4, it is an amendment that does not result in any significant environmental, social, economic or governance impacts on the land in the scheme area. And 3, proceed to advertise for public inspection proposed amendment number 201 in accordance with Regulation 47 of the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes Regulations 2015.
Okay. No seconder? Councillor Scanlon, I think you were first up. Is anyone against? There is, and we wish to debate it. Off you go, Councillor Colley.
Move that the motion be put, Mayor.
Okay, I've got a motion. The motion be put, councillors. So I need 11. Those in favour of the motion being put? Fails. Go on.
Councillors, from that attempt to put the motion, it failed, so I've no real desire to argue it. Simply that this is simply going out for advertising. There's conditions in there that meet the community expectations. It's possibly not necessarily the expectations of the applicant, but this has been a contentious use in the past, and these are conditions that the community, through my consultation, would like to see. There's been issues with odours supposedly coming from fertilisers kept within the yard. This motion is quite reasonable in respect of that it would only allow for dry fertilisers, the sort of ones you get in a plastic tub or the like, or a bag. It wouldn't provide for mushroom compost or the like, or something that might produce an odour. And we heard from the applicant that he doesn't keep those sort of things, so it shouldn't be an issue. The other, I'll just bring myself back to the correct page. The other condition that was placed in the motion is that no garden centre shall be permitted to utilise the street verge for parking and or service deliveries. I mean, it's a pretty standard condition that I think is important for this particular site, because there has been parking issues in the past where vehicles that are associated with the running of those particular businesses have been parking all over the verges on the opposite side and under the trees, where we ultimately had to create further parking spaces because of the degradation of the verge in that area. So this is just a simple condition being put on the development that the community want to have put in place. And then number 3, the retail sales associated with the garden centre shall occur wholly within the property boundary. Again, this is another condition that the community have spoken about. There's been placement of items for sale that have been on the verge outside of the property boundary that have been of concern to the community. So this is simply, again, if the applicant has issues with this, these are conditions that I think would suit the majority of the community. If the applicant has problems with it, he can come back and talk to us directly and explain that, well, maybe I do need some area on the verge to place some plants, and that might be the case, in which case we can amend this when it comes back to council. But I think if we just go out, councillors, with conditions to advertise, I think we're pretty well 80% of the way there if it is the inclination of this council to pass this motion when it comes back to council. So again, it's just for advertising. These are conditions that I think the community expect, and let's put this out there and see where it goes.
Councillor Scanlon is the seconder.
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Congdon against the motion.
Thanks, and I think Councillor Kylie and I had a short discussion. I'm not going to die on the sword on this, but it's a position where this is a scheme amendment and not a DA. So I don't know why we're applying conditions such as fertiliser, let's not park on the streets, and retail associated stuff outside the boundary, which I wouldn't have thought you could do anyway, but God knows how many people put their goods and wares out anywhere in the city of Swan for sale. And when you start talking about these, implying these conditions into the advertising, people will see these and go, okay, but then you further went on to say, oh, but if there's a change and the owner wants to put some stuff about, we could then revisit it. Very hard to, once the cat's out of... Councillor, please.
Councillor.
I didn't interrupt you. Thank you. Once the cat's out of the bag, it's pretty hard to stuff him back inside, as we know. So I'd like to see this just simply to move along to the scheme amendment and then treat the balance of it when it comes back. Thank you.
Speaker again, for the motion. Councillor Johnson. Councillor John, have you got a question or you wish to speak?
Sorry, it's just a question through you, Mr Mayor, if that's okay.
Yep, take your question.
It's just a quick one. Can we apply conditions to a scheme amendment? Can we get some clarification on that?
Mr Russell.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Just going to ask that exact same question, Mr Mayor.
I thought you intended to speak. Okay. Any speaker for the motion? Any against? Councillor Henderson.
Just briefly, Mayor, seeing as we're going out to do a scheme amendment and seek comment, I would have thought that you'd leave it open, completely open, and that then gives everyone an opportunity when they make submissions as part of the process to have their say. And then we can put conditions on when we finally get around to it. So I think we should go out there with a clean slate.
Okay. The speaker in favour of the motion? Councillor Johnson, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. The reason I think these conditions are a good idea is that there's been a lot of discussion in the community about this particular garden centre, which is, of course, already operating. So, as a result, the unusual situation when we're putting conditions on a scheme amendment is because the community already know what conditions they would want if it was a development application. Lots of neighbours have commented about smells from fertiliser. I myself have visited the site at Mr Noonan's request along with Mr Russell, and I did not see anything other than dry fertiliser there. So I think this condition would be entirely reasonable and accepted by the proponents and also the nearby residents. The garden centre shall not be permitted to utilise the street and verge parking and for delivery services. I think that's reasonable because and I think the community and Mr Noonan would support that because, as we know, Mr Noonan was given, I think, 4 or was it 5 bays immediately adjacent to his premises free of charge, so he does have somewhere to park his vehicles. The third one is interesting. Retail sales associated with the garden centre shall occur wholly within the property boundary. Mr Mayor, when I visited with Mr Russell and Mr Noonan pointed out something that was known to me, but which might not be known to other people, that the property boundary is actually well outside the area of the post office. So Mr Noonan does place pots and plants and various things apparently on the pavement, but if you look at the marking that he's put on the street, and if you look at Swan Intramaps, so if you look at the lot diagram, you can see that actually he does own quite a bit of the pavement. So this is entirely reasonable as well, because I think the community and Mr Noonan need to jointly understand where the property boundary is. So that's the reason why we've got conditions. It's unusual to have conditions on a scheme amendment, but it's because it's a retrospective application. We already know what the issues are. So that's the reason I think it will give confidence to the community, and I believe also to Mr Noonan to go out with these conditions, because I think the concept of a scheme amendment would probably be more likely to be accepted by the community if it had these conditions attached. So that's the reason why I think you should vote for the motion.
Thank you. Any councillors speaking for or against the motion? No. Councillor Coley, I'll ask you to close.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Johnson's point, they'll be more inclined, the community, to vote in favour when this comes back, if that's what we ultimately choose to do, by having these conditions in there. If we leave it open, as Councillor Henderson suggests, we might get a whole range of suggestions, at least that are beyond these conditions, but at least these conditions provide for a framework under which the community can look at it and say, is this reasonable? Otherwise, we could get a whole range of comments coming back. We do know the history of this property. It has been controversial, and it has not served us well not to have any conditions, because this is the cause of the whole problem in the first place. We need to have some conditions in place. There needs to be some guidance around the operation of this business in this area. So this is simply some very simple conditions that we heard from the applicant that he complies with in all instances anyway. He doesn't have wet fertilisers or smelly fertilisers. He doesn't use the verge for street parking, and he does... I don't know if he mentioned anything about the retail sales, but if Councillor Johnson is correct, this is an opportunity to clear up where his actual boundaries are placed too, because this is information that I didn't even know about. And personally, I don't have a problem with a retailer, as they do in the main strip of Guildford, placing their wares out on the street, on James Street, and I don't necessarily have a problem with Mr Noonan placing his wares out there, but there has to be some guidance at least, because when you go to a restaurant you often see that the chairs and tables aren't allowed to go into the footpath, for example. So it's not beyond a operator of this facility to put all of his wares out all over the footpath. At least you'll get someone's attention when they're walking past. So this is just some simple guidance, and if it doesn't suit the applicant, then let's hear back from him, let's hear from the community, and let's just move forward, because I think we're getting to what the community wants by putting those conditions in, and let's put it out to advertising. But bear in mind, there's going to be a lot of people in the community who just want the garden centre closed down. There are still going to be a lot of people, and that's the other comment I've had back. He hasn't got the parking, they say. Let's just move him on. So this is somewhere in between. So bear in mind that we are going to get comments that will say, do not go ahead with it, don't agree with it, let's not let him have a garden centre, and we have to be prepared for those comments as well. So you can choose, councillors, which way you want to have it, throw it out with no conditions, and which might really get the communities back up, in my mind. They will really be concerned with where you're going to take this ultimate amendment 201. So please vote for this motion and let's move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, now put the vote. Those in favour of the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Motion's carried. Now move to 4.7, which is the State Administrative Tribunal reconsideration of the proposed civic works site remediation of lot 134, number 133, Clayton Street, Bellevue. And again, it's Councillor Coley.
Councillors, my motion is to resolve that Council resolve to adopt the officer recommendation. It should be, with the addition of the following condition, 11, added into the conditions. The applicant is to provide the City of Swan with a photographic record of all stages of remediation upon completion of all works. And record the reason for the amendment is to provide a visual on-file record of work completed for future reference. This will permit future analysis of the suitability of this land for a range of purposes, including residential.
A seconder? Councillor Johnson. Is there anyone against?
Yes, I am, actually.
Do you wish to debate it?
I'd like to make a comment, yes, I would.
Okay, no worries. I was just about to declare it carried, but go on, if you want to make a comment.
I'll just make a quick comment if I could, Mayor.
Well, hang on a sec. No.
All right,
Well, I don't know. Councillor Catalano wants to make some kind of comment. I was about to declare the motion carried, which seems a bit...
No, I'm opposed to
You actually want to debate it?
I do want to say something about
Okay.
I'll be quick
Councillor
then.
Lloyd.
Councillors, this is a simple and a very beneficial condition for the future, because I attended the SAT mediation on this issue, and it became clear that the remediation of the site was required, and you could see from old photographs. That was the really beneficial thing of the SAT mediation, is they had a range of photos from the 1950s and 60s, aerial shots that showed where the actual pit was, where the problem areas were, and what had to be remediated. And without those images, they would be remediating the site blind. They wouldn't know where the clay pit was dug, and those images were very, very useful in understanding what the potential problem was when they were going in to remediate it. So this will, and I think this might be a guide for other developments where we end up covering over a potential problem in the future. If we have a series of photographs that we can put on record, this will allow us to assess down the track how much capping was placed, how deep it was excavated out, whether there was concrete laid down over as a cap, whether it was just geomesh, a whole range of things for the future where we can go back and look at this depending on what use of the land we ultimately approve in the future. So I encourage you to approve this. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson is the seconder.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, many councillors who've lived in the area for years may well know that Bellevue has had a number of pollution incidents. There's the Omex site, which is nearby, but which is not the subject of this land. There's also the waste control fire on the other side of the highway. This particular application is remediating the land, but only down to a depth of 2.5 metres. And we know that the polluted waste goes much deeper than that. So for that reason, I think we need to have a photographic record of exactly what they uncover as they dig down to 2.5 metres. As you know, if you've read the environmental management plan, which is great, it's in detail. We didn't have an environmental management plan before it went to SAT. They'll be digging it out, I think, in 20-metre strips. And as they dig each strip out, we'll get photographs of what is down there, so that in the event this site needs to be remediated again in the future, which you may well need to be, because this remediation is for industrial purposes, but the Bellevue land use study indicates that the long-term intended use for this site is residential. It will have to be remediated again. So if we take photographs, we'll basically know what's down there. We'll know what to dig up the second time around. So it's very low cost, not much impact on the proponent, and to the benefit of everybody concerned. Thank you.
Councillor Cataloni wants to speak against.
Yes, thank you. I think this is the problem I have with this is I think it's actually just putting a band-aid over what is effectively a fairly difficult and conflictual issue, and that is the industrial use of Bellevue that. How it just doesn't work well with the residential use there. And we had the deputation last week from the Bellevue Residents and Ratepayers Group, and they wanted this clean-up done to a residential standard so that actually they could move forward with transitioning this land into residential and away from industrial. And they also talked about reasons for that in terms of, now we've got the extra congestion on Clayton Street and we're going to end up with heavy industrial vehicles going through the residential areas. I mean, it's just the interface between residential and industrial in Bellevue is basically got out of hand. And actually, when this came up tonight, I thought, in fact, we shouldn't be putting band-aids on it. What we should be doing is actually asking for that higher standard of remediation, as was requested last week by the Bellevue residents and ratepayers, because we do need to start moving in that direction. And people in that community, in that residents and ratepayers group have actually put in years and years and years of effort working with staff for the Bellevue East land use study, that whole document that everyone's trying to put together and get committed to. And this now is a big parcel of land that is effectively going to be remediated to an industrial standard, which cuts right across that. So I can't support it because I think it's just a band-aid, and let's just clean the site up to the residential standard that was asked for last week. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other speakers? Question, Councillor Lucas.
Planning staff. It was my understanding from last week's agenda forum that we haven't got the, I'll say, right in inverted brackets to get the proponents to clean it up to the residential because the land is zoned industrial and that's what they're required to do. Mr. Russell or Mr. Vanderlinde?
Through Mr Mayor, that's correct. I believe I advised the Council in this chamber last week that trying to impose a standard as a condition on a development application that related to something that might conceivably happen in the future wouldn't be sustainable. That's correct. That's what I said.
Okay. Any other speakers? Councillor Coley, wish to...
Yeah, just briefly, Mayor, I just wish to acknowledge the concerns of the Bellevue Residents and Ratepayers Association in the remediation of this site, and that Ballas identifies this land as future urban, and I think that that it may be possible in the future, although this is not the decision we're making now tonight. We've already decided that this would be approved, and it went to SAT, and there were further conditions imposed and came back. So it's not up to us tonight to determine whether this would go ahead at all. It's simply about getting this approved, rejecting it or approving it, and I think this condition to have a photographic record is a step in the right direction, so that, as Councillor Johnson pointed out, that it could be looked at as a future residential zoned area, and if we have this record in place. Thank you.
Okay. For the motion, those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Declare it carried 13-2. Now move to item 4.8. Is Council recommendation site development assessment unit significant development application stock feed grain mill at lot 1780 number 46 Gaston Road, Bullsbrook. Is Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I propose that the Council resolve to 1. Adopt the officer recommendation with the following additional reason for refusal, and 2 is the addition that any purported economic benefits do not outweigh the paramount importance of orderly and proper planning and the associated preservation of the amenity of the locality as expressed through section 2756B of the Planning and Development Act and the City's adopted local planning scheme number 17.
Seconder, Councillor McCulloch. Is anyone against? Declare it carried. Move it now to councillors, if you mind. Item 5.1, construction of a footpath, Sophia Street, Bellevue, Albert Street, end of the cul-de-sac, and a motion from Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My motion reads that Council resolve to defer consideration of this item until the ordinary meeting of Council to be held on 7 July 2021, following a meeting scheduled to be held regarding the implementation of the Bellevue East Land Use Study as per the Council resolution on 12 May 2021 in regard to item 13.6, Bellevue East Land Use Study Review.
Seconder in Councillor Johnson. Is anyone against? Declare it carried. Item 6.6 is Office of the Auditor General additional annual information systems audit end of year 30 June 2020. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll read the whole thing out. That the Council resolved to endorse the actions to address the Officer of the Auditor General audit findings, submit the report and letter to the Minister for Local Government Housing addressing the significant findings, publish the report on the City's website. 4, these are the new parts, conduct a risk assessment of each audit finding and a cost-benefit of each proposed action to prioritise implementation of the action plan. 5, present the action plan with budget and timeframe to Council via the Audit Committee. 6, reason for changing the officer's recommendation is that many of the actions are required to mitigate significant risks and therefore a cost and time frame is needed as the work may be beyond the capacity of the City of Swan's existing resources.
Seconder in Councillor Congleton. Anyone against? Declare that carried. Now move to item 6.7, policy, debt collection rates and service charges. This is a motion from Councillor Podolnik.
Okay, that Council resolved to 1. Defer consideration and adoption of policy 186, debt collection rates and service charges, and 2. Instruct the CEO to investigate what support the City of Swan can give under the Local Government Act 1995, Section 6.47, including 1. To define categories of vulnerable ratepayers who might not be able to respond to rate notices, 2. To define an alternative process and time frame to recover rates arrears from people in the vulnerable ratepayer category. B. Hold a briefing session for councillors in September 2021 on the City of Swan's rates collection process and procedures, including 1. From the moment a person falls into rate arrears to the point they have their house sold. 2. To discuss people-orientated solutions to see what alternatives we can put in place. C. Report back to Council in November 2021. D. Include improving communication with ratepayers in the policy, specifically to 1. Ensure that those whose homes we plan to sell are told via email, where possible, and by post at least 4 weeks before their homes get listed on the Council agenda. 2. Advise them what process they need to follow to present their case to Council at both the agenda forum and Council meeting. 3. Record the reason for changing the officer recommendation is that there appears to be categories of ratepayers who need additional guidance during the rates arrears recovery process, and proceeding to sale of land without directly contacting them may not be effective.
Seconder. Who was first? Councillor Coley might have been first. Is anyone against?
Amendment.
Okay, you're proposing an amendment. Let's hear it.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, yeah, I'd like to insert after section 2A1 the part of my motion, which is 1B. I'll read it out. So after 2A1, what I'd like to insert is to define a process to identify vulnerable people among ratepayers who are more than 3 years and $10,000 in arrears.
Will that mean your whole motion is now included?
More or less.
As the mover, Councillor Podolnik.
I don't agree with that, but I welcome you to explain to me what you're trying to achieve, because I feel like it's actually against what I'm trying to achieve.
Okay.
Someone seconds it then, I can explain.
Councillor, not you, you're fine. You're the seconder. Okay, so the mover and the seconder don't have it, so you're going to have to move an amendment and you need to get a seconder for it.
So I'm moving an amendment, Mr Mayor, because I actually wrote most of the motion and this is a critical part.
Councillor Scan second. All right, well, let's hear your debate on it.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, Mr Mayor, when I wrote my motion, what I was trying to achieve was to firstly define categories of vulnerable ratepayers who might not be able to respond to rate notices. People who are ill, people who are disabled, people who are absent for some reason, people who maybe just don't understand what's going on. So that's the first thing. We want the CEO within the policy to come up with a list of categories.
Councillor, that's already in the motion. You're
yes,
talking
I know.
to the
so
one particular part.
Now I'm moving on to my part of the motion. So my amendment,
thank you.
My amendment is to define, for the CEO, to define a process to identify those vulnerable people among the group of ratepayers, the cohort of ratepayers, who are actually 3 years and $10,000 in arrears. The reason being, we need to shrink down the group of people we're identifying. So I think we've got, 85,000 ratepayers? We can't identify amongst a group of 85,000 ratepayers which are the vulnerable ones. We can understand which are the categories, but we can't do a sweep through the whole 85,000. What we need to do is to identify amongst the people who are actually in arrears, and the Local Government Act requires that it be more than 3 years, and I think we've decided for legal optimal reasons that $10,000 is the limit. We need to shrink the group that we're searching through for vulnerable people. So of those people who are 3 years and $10,000 in arrears, What we need to do is to say how many are there. And if you look in section 10, the answers from the staff. The staff say it's about 450. So they're giving the number of ratepayers in recent years. I think it's 10.2, if I can find the section. 10.2, question A12 on page 17 of the order paper. So in 2021, up to this year, it's 420. Last year, it was 750. The year before that was 455, where he proceeded with a general procedure claim. That's a much more manageable number. So when I defined this process, or asked the CEO to come up with a process, I included this item because it was necessary in order for the process to work. So that's why it's necessary, councillors. Without this particular process, the entire policy would not function, because we would not be able to search through 85,000 ratepayers, but I'm pretty sure we can search through a few hundred. So that's the reason. Thank you.
Councillor Scanlon is the seconder.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Question, Councillor Congleton.
Because someone explained to me the position of the 3 years and 10,000, and you said legal or optimal, $10,000. Can I have an explanation of that, please? Sorry, can I, with all due respect, Councillor, I'd like to address it to the staff.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure what the $10,000 refers to.
And my further question through you, Mr. Mayor, to the CEO, the commentary in the wording legal and optimal.
Ms. Lowe, you're shaking your head, so Mr. CEO? Mr. Johnson. Councillor, you're going to have to explain legal and optimal.
Yeah, I can explain that quite easily. Look, the 3 years comes from the Local Government Act. I think you accept that.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I understand the 3 years. I'm talking about
the $10,000.
The wording of legal and optimal. Thank you.
It's not in the motion. It's what I said in my speech. So I understand, and the staff can correct me if I'm wrong, in a general procedure claim, if the amount is over $10,000, that reduces the risk that the city would have to pay costs in the event that the city lost. So that's my understanding. It's optimal from a cost point of view. And you may notice that most of our GPCs are for just over $10,000.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I can just add, it's not just at the stage where rates are unpaid after 3 years that a GPC can be lodged. It can be lodged in the first year when rates become overdue.
You got a question, Councillor?
Yeah, just following up on what Ms Lay said, if I could just get a bit more of a clarification. The number that Councillor Johnson has referenced in relation to 2021, 450 people, general procedure claim, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it can take as little as 3 months. From what I understand, we have a period of grace, and if people don't contact the City of Swan and they don't enter into a payment plan and they don't do anything after 3 months, that's when we lodge our first general procedure claim. Is that correct?
Ms Lay?
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Prodovnik is correct. It's after no action or no response from the final notice and then the letter of demand. If there's no response from the ratepayer, that's the next stage of proceedings.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Scanlon, there's a second. You wish to speak?
I seconded this motion for the purpose of debate. I wanted to hear Councillor Johnson's explanation, and having heard the explanation, I understand how it fits into Councillor Prodovnik's motion, because this is simply about the policy of debt collection, rates and services charges, and I think that this the process to identify who is vulnerable is important. That's really all I have to add.
Okay. Any speakers against the amendment? Yes, Councillor McNamara.
It's through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Johnson. Why 3 years? Why not? Why not define a process earlier? Because 3 years. Do you not agree? This is a question, Mr. Mayor. Do you not agree that the horse has bolted after 3 years? We are actually in a situation at 3 years that is either irreversible or we have to actually go through what Ms Lay is just after saying, the legal process. So why 3 years? Why not 1 year or 2 years or whatever?
Because the answer to that is simply, my understanding is that the Local Government Act does not give the City of Swan power to proceed against people unless it's more than 3 years. So I think you might be mixing something up here. So what it says in the amendment is more than 3 years and $10,000 in arrears. So I'm saying that it could potentially be more than that. I'm asking the CEO to define a process along these lines. This is not the process. It's an instruction to the CEO to define a process to identify vulnerable people among those ratepayers who are more than 3 years and $10,000 in arrears. So those people that we're going to proceed, use a GPC against, we need to identify who that group is, so we know it's about $450 a year. And then in that group of 450, we're trying to identify, are there any vulnerable people? That's the concept. And we're asking the CEO to create a process to identify vulnerable people among a group of 450 instead of among a group of 85,000. So you see, it's just more practical.
Mr. Mayor? The question is, do you agree that it is not Local Government Act you're asking the CEO, do you agree that you're asking the CEO to develop an in-house process, not a Local Government Act? It's not subject to Local Government Act. Do you not agree to that?
The idea is to come up with a process that conforms to the city's powers under the Local Government Act, but which is more humane because it's identifying vulnerable people amongst the cohort of people who have become in arrears and against whom the city may proceed. That's the concept.
Mr. Mayor, the question will have to go to Ms Lay. Ms Lay, should we not understand why the ratepayer is not paying prior to the hassle of 3 years? Prior to them getting into that situation, should we not understand the reasons why the actual payments are not made prior to 3 years before they get down that road?
Through Mr Mayor, I believe that's the intent of Councillor Prodovnik's motion.
It is.
Which so I've got a question. Go on.
Well, we're already dealing with one amendment.
Got a further question. How many ratepayers are in arrears right now? Approximately.
Mr Mayor, I don't have the number of ratepayers. The financial management report will show that current rate debtors are in the order of 15 million.
It's tens of thousands.
So do you want to amend Councillor Johnson's amendment there? Sort of be good. Well, we've got to deal with his amendment first. So now, the Speaker against Councillor Johnson's amendment, yes.
Yes, look, I just think what's happening here is it's obviously there's clearly a confusion about the process, as evidenced by Councillor Johnson's rationale for his amendment. If he really understood what I was trying to do here, he would understand that it actually does not fit with my motion. And my motion is actually supporting what Councillor McNamara is saying, is that we really do need to identify people around the 3-month mark when the first general procedural claim is issued. Now, a lot of those people actually pay that general procedure claim and they're fine. So we can't actually automatically identify them as vulnerable. So this is part of a broader discussion. Again, Councillor Johnson's welcome to have that discussion in the course of a briefing, but I cannot support this amendment. It goes against actually the intent of my motion.
Okay. Speaker for the amendment?
I think I can understand what he's saying, because what he's saying is that if you look at 2A1, you're talking about categories of vulnerable ratepayers. Now, those ratepayers can be from people who are 6 months in arrears and who might have disability. They might have we've heard the stories from people who victims of domestic violence. There might be people who've lost their jobs. So many categories of vulnerable ratepayers, and there's a lot of them. There's it's an extensive list now. There's a lot of vulnerable people out there. People who've lost their jobs. So that's one area, and that's a very, very broad area. But I think what he's referring to, and why I do actually agree with it being put in this motion, is because what he's saying that there is now a vulnerable, even more vulnerable group of people, and they are more than 3 years in arrears, and they're also more than $10,000 in arrears, and it's actually those people who are going on and whose ball's rolling on to their homes being sold. So in fact, perhaps they are actually the most vulnerable of the vulnerable category, and they're the ones that we need to be first focusing on, because they're the ones that we're trying to keep out of the state of homelessness so that they can retain their homes, so that they can ultimately pay their rates, which I think is the rest of Councillor Predovnik's motion is talking to, which is about people whose homes we plan to sell or whatever. So, in fact, we do need to, first of all, there has to be this very strong focus on identifying those people who are going to have, if they don't get enough finances together to start paying their rates, they are actually going to be put on the list for their homes to be sold, and that's the very list. They are the most vulnerable, as I've said, because they're going to be made homeless, and I don't think that's actually in anyone's best interest, either those particular people, but also the communities that they're in, because the burden then falls on those communities, and in fact on the reputational. The way that the city is viewed by the community. So I do see the point, and I think we should just add it in, because what it's doing is it's identifying that very, very vulnerable group of people. Well, just in terms of identifying those people.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lucas.
Speaking against the alternative, and the reason I do that is Councillor Predovnik's motion clearly states in item 2, instruct the CEO to A, investigate what support the City of Swan can give under the Local Government Act 1995, including 1, to define categories of vulnerable ratepayers who might not be able to respond to rate notices, and 2, to define an alternative process and timeframes to recover rates arrears from people in the vulnerable ratepayer category. Let's not let them get to the 3-year 10,000 mark. Let's get them to them earlier, so they never go to that and get their house on the for sale list. So early intervention is always better. And I just need to make sure that everybody understands, particularly those people who perhaps missed last week's agenda forum. 2 houses in the last 20 years have been sold. We heard deputations from various people last week. They see dozens of homeless people sleeping in cars or on the street. Well, none of those people was a result of having their homes sold by the City of Swan, because my understanding is both those instances were as a result of deceased estates, and the properties were vacant anyhow because the person who was residing there and paying the rates had passed away and had no contactable family members to take up the rate paying or to receive that property in some type of inheritance. So let's be clear, people, that the emotive issues that we're selling houses left, right and centre is not fact. 2 in 20 years. Councillor Johnston wanted us to go back 50 years, but I don't think that's relevant, because I don't think we've got records going back 50 years, but you'll most probably find Councillor Johnston was only 2 in the last 50 years. So I fully support Councillor Predovnik's motion, it gives us time to work out a policy to identify people in different types of categories and get them to them early through a good communication strategy so they don't get to the 3-year $10,000+ mark. Thank you.
Well, what do you want to do? You want to speak for the motion? Against the amendment? Oh, hang on, I need a speaker for the amendment.
A question to the mover, please. Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to ask the mover if you can explain how adding in the amendment.
Oh, no, I can't allow that question because that was Councillor Scanlon. I'm sorry, I can't allow that question. That was Councillor Johnson's role when he moved the motion.
Finished asking.
Well, I'm sorry, if you didn't understand it, that was Councillor Johnson's role and he explained his intention when he moved the motion. So I'm not going to allow that question.
Can I please suggest that we just hear Councillor Scanlon? Please just ask her question.
No, I'm sorry, Councillor, I've already ruled on it and I'm not going back on that.
Well,
so I'm going to ask
you've
her...
interrupted her a number of times tonight and she's just trying to
I've
ask
interrupted
a
once
question.
before, Councillor, and I'll tell you not to interrupt me.
I just think that she should be able to finish her question before
I don't know whether you're hard of hearing me, Councillor. I'm only 6 feet away. I ruled against it and that's not the case. So I'm going to ask now, are there any speakers for the amendment?
Can I just move with dissent from your ruling there, because it would be good to hear Councillor Scanlon's question, so I'll move that way.
So you're telling me you didn't explain yourself properly in the first place when you opened the debate?
No, we're just moving a motion now to dissent from your motion.
Well, is there anyone in favour of the dissension? Yep. Beauty. You didn't get enough, that failed. Right, now I'm going to ask again, is there any speakers for the amendment? Councillor Kiley, you've indicated you wish to speak against. Next time.
Thank you, Mayor. I would have liked to hear what Councillor Scanlon had to say. Councillors, I was of the belief, as of last Wednesday, you were sent a document that I've been sent, and I know some councillors have been. It's the State Ombudsman's Local Government Collection of Overdue Rates for People in Situations of Vulnerability Good Practice Guide. And it's a 28-page document, and I apologise because I just assumed everybody had been sent it, and I just checked the email. Some have and some haven't. It was sent by the Reverend Alison Gilchrist, who came and presented last week, and thank you, Alison, if you're listening, for sending that out, because it's a very good document. It says it has 12 principles that it outlines for local councils to stick by, and it said in Good Practice Guide number 5, Guidance 5, if they have not already done so, local governments should develop and publish a financial hardship policy that is responsive to the needs of people in situations of vulnerability, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in situations of vulnerability. And much of what it says, and the 12 guidances there, accords with what Councillor Prodovnik's put forward. And I think her motion, well, I'm just speaking against the amendment to start with. The Councillor Johnson's motion talks about $10,000 and looking at that situation, but Good Practice Guide 9 says local government should encourage the proactive early identification of people in situations of vulnerability, as per Councillor McNamara's point, to minimise the accumulation of debt. And I think there are people in the community who will consider that $3,000 or $4,000 is a huge debt to be carrying, and we need to identify those people early or have them come to us and explain their situation. So I will forward this to all councillors shortly, but it's a very good document, very easy to read, and it talks about people support for women experiencing domestic violence and a whole range of other good practice guidances. So but I can't support Councillor Johnson's amendment because it's setting the bar too high to start with. So, thank you.
CEO, you wish to make a comment?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to add further comment to Councillor Kiley's comments there, we did receive correspondence back in 2018 from the Ombudsman in relation to input into those guidelines, and I'll just quote something, and I'm happy to send this out as well to councillors. I would like to thank the City for providing feedback on the draft Good Practice Guidance. Your feedback was carefully considered and positively contributed to the final practice guidance. You and your staff have been highly cooperative, responsive and engaged with the good practice guidance. So I'll send that out to all councillors as well in relation to that.
Right, any further speakers for or against? Councillor Johnson, asked you to close.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, Mr Mayor, what I'm doing here is adding in a step in the process that I defined in my motion. So, Councillor Prodovnik, I've very kindly lent Councillor Prodovnik part of my motion. So to No, it's my exact words. To define categories of vulnerable ratepayers who might not be able to respond to rate notices. That's the categories, the types, nothing more. It's just whether you're divorced or other things. And then to determine what the size of the cohort is. Now, the cohort has to be shrunk down or it will create an inordinate amount of work for staff. So the cohort of ratepayers in arrears right now is in the thousands, tens of thousands of ratepayers. But if we look at only those ratepayers who are defined as in arrears where we can recover via sale of land, that cohort is much smaller. You can see in section 10.2, question 12, and the answer, it's in the region of hundreds. 450 last year, 750 this year. That's the reason. It's to be aligned with the Local Government Act, to reduce the amount of work for staff, and I would say probably to spend less time going out there communicating with people asking if they're vulnerable. Let's wait until we actually know what the class of people are who've actually got a problem. So that's the reason for it. It's just inserting back the process that I defined. And the final one was to define an alternative process and timeframe to recover rates arrears from people in the vulnerable ratepayer category that we've identified. A smaller group, not a larger group. We just don't have the resources to chase after tens of thousands of people and ask them if they're vulnerable. And what I'm proposing is exactly in line with the Local Government Act. We wait for 3 years before we do it. So that's the reason.
Okay. The councillors are now asked to vote on the amendment. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3. The amendment fails. Councillors, as per our standard procedures, now going to stop even though we're 15 minutes late for the 10-minute comfortable break, and we'll be back at 25 past.
Mr Mayor, can we put it to put? Could you just finish that one?
Well, unless we go, okay, we don't get any paid on it. Okay, in that case, I'll now put the substantive motion. We're back to a mover and a seconder. Is there anyone against? No one against. We'll declare it carried. Item 7.1, which is annual review of the City's Register of Delegations and Authorised Officers, and we need absolute majority on this one. I move to Councillor Parry.
I'll just read the amended recommendation first, if you don't mind, Mr Mayor. That Council resolved to... So there's an updated one, amended recommendation that says that Council resolved to revoke the City's COVID-19 delegations related to 1, Tender Review Committee, 2, Expressions of Interest, Pre-Qualified Suppliers and Tenders, and 27, Statutory Planning, 2, adopt the proposed changes to the delegations register as per the updated attachment distributed on 9 June 2021. 3, adopt the proposed changes to the guideline execution of city documents. So that's the change from the officer's recommendation, councillors. So first things first, can I ask a question to Ms Albright, if you don't mind, Mr Mayor? Yeah, I know. That's the amended recommendation from the officer. She's changed the brochure, so I've just got to ask her to clarify what items have been changed from the previous attachment that we had there. That's the first part, if you don't mind, Mr Mayor.
Ms Albright.
Through you, Mr Mayor. So that is the amended officer recommendation that Councillor Parry has just read out to the Council. The attachment that was provided with the report was the incorrect attachment, so we've tabled tonight the corrected attachment. The changes that have been made are that the sub-delegation from the CEO to other staff were accidentally included in the delegation. They're not part of the council decision. That's for the CEO to determine. So they were accidentally included. They've been removed in this version.
Okay. There you go, Councillor Parry.
Thank you,
Mr. Seconder.
Through you, Mr Mayor.
No.
My apologies for interrupting. Councillor Parry has moved the officer recommendation. Councillor Parry actually has his own
That's
alternate
correct, Mr
motion.
Mayor. I was just explaining what happened to the councillors in regards to the change to the amendment. Now I want to move my alternative recommendation, Mr Mayor, if you don't mind.
Yep, that's as clear as mud. Okay, we'll go ahead and move
Well,
your motion.
it wasn't me that did that, Mr Mayor. That council resolved to revoke the city's COVID-19 delegations relating to 1, Tender Reviews Committee, 2, Expressions of Interest, Pre-Qualified Suppliers and Tenders, and 27, Statutory Planning. 2, adopt the proposed changes to the delegation register as per the updated attachment distributed on 9th of June 2021. 3, request that city officers develop and implement a risk assessment process to incorporate into procurement planning for all requests for tender over $250,000 no later than the 1st of October 2021. 4, request that the CEO uses the risk assessment in determining whether or not Any matter considered under the delegation to expressions of interest, pre-qualified suppliers and tenders should be referred to the Tender Review Committee for consideration. 5. Adopt the proposed changes to the guideline execution of city documents. 6. Record the reason for the amendments to the staff recommendation as 1. The CEO has the discretion of the delegation to refer any matter back to the TRC. This discretion should be informed by a risk assessment process. 2. It is not only financial risk that should determine whether or not a matter should be considered under delegation. 3. That the city has a risk management framework that it can use to assess these risks.
Okay, do I have a seconder? Councillor Congerton. Is anyone against? Question, Councillor.
Mayor, I'm interested in if there's any cost implications for changing this.
Ms Albright.
Through you, Mr Mayor, only staff time to undertake the risk assessments.
Okay, there you go. Okay, if there's anyone against, I'll declare it carried. That now takes us to Part C, and we have first C 1.1 is Councillor Catalano.
I put in a motion to defer my motion, C 1.1.
Okay, well, you need a second if you're moving deferral. Okay. Second to Councillor Kyle. Is anyone against? Declare it carried. Now go to C 1.2, Councillor Jones and Bullsbrook to Ellenbrook bus service.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've just lost the page. Can I just borrow yours? Thank you. I just lost the page. That the Council resolved to write to the Public Transport Authority requesting a bus service between Bullsbrook and Ellenbrook Town Centre. The reason for the motion is an increasing demand for such a service from the residents of Bullsbrook.
Seconded, Councillor McCulloch. Is anyone against? That carried. Item C 1.3 is Councillor Kyle in alignment of Workshops Avenue.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, my motion is that Council resolve to stop all works related to the construction of Workshops Avenue Midland. Number 2, put an immediate halt to any further depositing of soil within the existing floodplain related to the proposed Workshops Avenue construction. 3, report back to Council on an alternative alignment of the proposed Workshops Avenue Midland with the aim of ensuring that the Helena River floodplain is not impacted by roadworks or filling of land related to this road construction. And 4, report back to Council on an alternative alignment, possible entry or connection points to Lloyd Street, financial implications and any other appropriate considerations. Reason for the motion: there are important environmental and cultural and natural heritage considerations that need to be considered prior to proceeding with any work. An alternative entry point from Lloyd Street, alignment and construction method may result in better environmental outcomes.
Seconder? Please. Councillor Catalano. Is there anyone against? There is. You wish to debate it? Councillor Johnson? No, okay. I'll put it straight to vote. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rest are favour. Against. Motion is lost. Now move to C 1.4, Councillor Johnson and planning compliant policies.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. My motion is that Council resolve to request the CEO prepare a Council planning compliance policy. The policy to include the steps planning staff will take and timeframes for issue of direction and prosecution when an unlawful planning use is brought to the attention of the City. B, the action will take and timeframes for issue of direction and prosecution when a non-lawful use is identified and the owner refuses to make the necessary retrospective planning application or apply for scheme amendment. C, the acceptable maximum duration to wait for a retrospective application. And D, how the compliance actions can be periodically reported to Council. The reason for the motion is that it appears that while the vast majority of landowners comply with planning law and local planning scheme 17, there is a very small number that do not, and they are gaining financial advantages over law-abiding landowners and impacting the amenity of surrounding landowners.
Seconder? Councillor Kiley. Is there anyone against? There is. Wish to debate it? Hello?
No, I'm listening, Mr Mayor. It's there's probably an accusation of why aren't we debating, so I'll debate it.
Okay. Councillor Johnson, off you go.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Collington, for wanting to listen to me again. Councillors, I think we all know where this one is coming from. There's a particular scenario that has emerged, as we all know, in Guildford. And that scenario began long before I was a councillor. It's only in my first 2 or 3 years on council that people started asking me, has that particular premises got a development consent? And I said, of course it has. It's been operating for years, of course it has. But then eventually I asked the question and discovered that no, it doesn't have a development consent. And as you know, we're still discussing that even now, 5.5 years into council. It must be comfortably 6 or 7 years. So, council, what this is about is creating a public policy that everybody can look at. So when this first emerged, I remember saying, oh, no, of course it's got a planning consent. And of course I was proven wrong. And then I was saying to people, no, we'll very quickly resolve this. This won't take long at all. Well, now we've identified that there is no development consent, then, the staff will get onto it. Well, here we are 5.5 years later. So I think it would be useful to have a policy that's a public document that everybody can look to and say that, well, once we've discovered a scenario where a retrospective application is needed, there needs to be a fixed time frame in which the landowner needs to submit their development application, after which time the city will begin a directions notice and then prosecution. That's all it's about. It's about ensuring a fair playing field for everybody, because there are some councils who are familiar with the situation concerned. There's a very similar business nearby, and this is a question coming up: is if that similar business is abiding by the law 100%, and another business is not compliant, what do we do? And there didn't appear to be any really satisfactory answer. I never really got an answer as to how long do we wait. And really that's what this is about. It's about saying we're a big city, nearly everybody complies. We get very, very few retrospective applications. And of the few retrospective applications, there's a very small number that are proving, shall we say, interesting. And that is, I think, well, we need this policy. I think it's long overdue, and I have also been able to use the fact that I've got this motion coming up to say to people who are impacted, to say there's no need, we're not going to move any councillor motions about any individual landowners who you think are not compliant. Instead, the way that a councillor goes is we look at strategy, we look at policy. So that's why we need a policy. So we're not targeting any particular individual. It's something that applies to all retrospective applications and all landowners who perhaps really ought to be put in a DA when they haven't done. So that's the reason for my motion. Thank you.
Councillor Gold is the seconder.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Johnson, for raising this important issue. And I really do thank you for putting it forward. Councillors, we need to understand, given that we are involved in what they call a complaints-based system, that we don't respond unless we get a complaint. But we don't know where these complaints are going, and I think that Councillor Johnson's motion addresses that. It gives us an awareness of what's being complained about in terms of planning, and I think that even the officer comment there, they talk about being transparent, consistent, proportionate and transparent decisions. Well, this motion will ensure that we do have transparent decisions. It will bring it out, at least to us, and make us aware of what decisions or what actions are being taken against developments that are not compliant and are unlawful, or whether they're against our local law or state law or federal law. And I think we as councillors need to be aware of what is actually being complained about, because we are ultimately responsible for the decisions of staff and the decisions of the CEO. We need to be aware of what's happening on the ground. If we are it's just not good enough for us simply to be approving things and then not following up on what's actually taking place. And simply this is about understanding what complaints are coming in and how we're going to deal with them, and ensuring that the CEO and staff are working to ensure that these complaints are being dealt with appropriately. I note that there is a review in place, but I think Councillor Johnson's motion of putting a policy in there will give us surety around how we deal with them. So please vote for this. I think it gives us a good governance tool into the future. And as staff point out, that we are a growing council and there's huge rapid growth in the area. We need to keep abreast of what's actually going on. We can't personally all just keep abreast of, understand, oh, well, I remember that being complained about and I remember that being non-compliant. I think we need to have a schedule of issues that can be brought before council and then address them on a monthly or 3-monthly basis or the like. So please vote for this motion.
Excuse me, councillors. Speaker against the motion, Councillor Congleton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
You're welcome, councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson, for bringing this to the chamber. I was a little bit confused by the words on 2B. I had to read it 10 times just to understand what the first 6 words were. But however, I'm more concerned with the officer's comments in relation to, as a result of an internal review, the city's enforcement approach has been recommended for commencement in 21-22, and a report on the outcome of the review, when completed, should address the matters raised by the councillors' motions. Having been a councillor for numerous years, I've had lots of complaints raised with me directly by, more importantly, in commercial areas, of people putting in illegal mezzanine floors and whatever it may be, not necessarily reflecting on an impost to the city in terms of its rate revenue, but more on things like car parking and other associated entities. And always I've found the staff to act on those complaints very quickly and have those addressed and those being brought to council. So I don't really know the intention here of your policy for the staff to resolve to create another policy when we already have an enforcement management practice in place. So sadly, councillor, I can't vote for your motion.
Speaker for the motion. Are the speakers against? Councillor McNamara.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, it's my opinion and my view that Councillor Johnson started off his saying that you understand this is not pointed at any individual or any current situation in Guildford in particular. Right? This is what he said. Yet, I honestly believe that Councillor Johnson and Councillor Kiley should have declared an impartiality interest in this particular one, because both of them are totally against the post office issue, and that may be the reason.
Mayor, I'm going to ask that the Councillor McNamara withdraw that, because
no, I said it's my opinion.
Well,
and my view.
Your opinion's being made public on this floor, and you should retract that, because you cannot tell
just okay.
whether
Hang on
I'm
a second.
for...
You don't lecture the councillor. You raise your one. Yeah, councillor. I think you're probably right there. That I find it hard, given that there was no particular business mentioned, although one heavily hinted at, that there was impartiality there. So I'll ask you just to withdraw that and carry on.
Well, Mr Mayor, if you believe that I erred, then I apologise to those particular councillors. But my beliefs...
Apology accepted, councillor.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Kiley. My beliefs were
we know your beliefs.
supplemented by the statements by Councillor Johnson. So, but that's, by the way, and my apology is gone, and it's over and done with, I hope. Yes, thank you very much indeed. Have you accepted my apology, Councillor Johnson?
Yes, I have, Councillor.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Keep going, John.
That's it. So, Mr Mayor, I do believe, Mr Mayor, that Councillor Congleton raised certain situations, that this is not just... this can be an extremely wide situation from the point of view of planning developments. If a particular, especially particularly in the commercial and industrial zones, if a particular company has landscaping, for instance, that are told by as a condition that their landscaping must be a certain percentage, and jealous or whatever it is neighbour says, oh, he's not complying with the actual situation, it can be reported. So it can come down to a menial situation from the point of view of reporting and extra work for staff, extra work just because people do make mistakes in percentages and etc. So basically, and as Councillor Congreson says, it is a fairly wide consequence according to the consequences of this particular motion would be much wider than the actual intent. Thank you very much indeed.
Any speakers for or against the motion? Okay. Councillor Johnson, I asked you to close the debate.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, my intention actually is to move the compliance from being a management practice to being that is not visible to the community, being the elected residents and ratepayers of Councillor McNamara, to being a policy which is a public document viewable by everyone, renewed by Council regularly. So in the event that the policy turned out to be too onerous for those commercial and industrial properties that had to, say, do a bit of landscaping and then somebody parks their car in it and the grass stops growing, then that policy could be changed, or presumably there could be an amendment to the development to change the conditions. Look, sometimes we know that some landowners do make genuine mistakes, but if they are escalated through this process and there's a fixed time frame, they'll be fixed fairly quickly. So I'd say if we did discover there were a very large number of minor things being brought to staff's attention and being handled through the compliance policy, then that could be fixed through reporting, because it does include reporting, and it asks the CEO to advise how the compliance actions can be periodically reported to Council. And if we find that there's too many or it's not quite working well, we can change the policy, because we'll review it every 2 years or 3 years, as is our practice. So, councillors, that's all I've got to say on this. I think it'd be great because it would be transparent, and people could be confident that the local planning scheme was being followed by everybody. Thank you.
Okay, the motion, those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rest are against. The motion is lost. Okay, Councillor, before we go to closed doors, I've been informed I need to go back to item 13.8, which wasn't picked up on the en bloc vote. So I need a motion to move that. Move Councillor Parry. 13.8 is the single house at Peachy Road. Move Councillor Parry. Come a seconder. Councillor Johnson. Is anyone against? That one's carried as well. Councillor, we need to go behind closed doors for one, so I can have a motion to close the doors. Councillor Parry, seconded Councillor Kiley. We're now closed behind closed doors. I'll ask our two guests to leave.